Good evening, everyone. I have been told very nicely to remind everyone to turn on their microphones if they're speaking. If not, it's not on the tape at all. And so you'll hear a question and no answer. So please remember to do that. If you're speaking, you can turn it off for the rest of the time. Okay, Justin's going to do the roll call.
Commissioner Holmes.
Here.
Commissioner Irvin.
Here.
Commissioner Klein. Commissioner Krutoff.
Yep.
Commissioner Lancaster. Vice Chair Jameson.
Here.
Chair Rhodey.
Here. We have the minutes from the last meeting. They look okay to everybody. We need a motion to approve them. Okay, need a second?
Second.
Right. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Need to approve the agenda. This was the agenda we came up with at the last meeting, and it looks like they've added some items. Follow-up must have been from our question with all the departments. So we need a motion to approve the agenda. Okay. Dale, you seconding again?
Second. Yeah.
Okay. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Don't believe we have any written communications. Do we have any communications from the audience? Does anyone have anything they want to share? All right, we're ready for the MERS presentation. The MERS is our pension plan. One of the big issues that we had when we implemented the income tax was that the funding was going to go toward a huge percentage of it was going to go toward our liability because at that point the issue. And we've come a long way, but we're going to go over exactly where we are at the end of the year. Go ahead.
Thank you so much. My name's Marnie Daggett and I'm with MERS, and I'm here to kind of, I was provided several questions to cover at the beginning. And then certainly if you have questions throughout, please ask so that I'm here to fulfill your needs. So the first thing I'll kind of go through is just kind of a high level overview. You want to move it closer?
Pull it right up.
Yep. No, you're good. Thank you. So we're going to go over the defined benefit and the hybrid plans, the defined benefit side of the hybrid plans as well. So those are the different types of pension plans that you have with MERS. So first, again, just to orient you, MERS is an independent retirement services company. We're created specifically to administer retirement plans for Michigan's local government on a not-for-profit basis. We're with 84% of municipalities in the state of Michigan, over 140,000 participants, and we manage over $18 billion in assets. And MERS is the sole fiduciary of the plan. So when we think about it from a legal compliance, from an investment oversight, and also from reasonable expenses, that is something that we really focus on. We're governed by an independent elected board that focuses solely and has the sole fiduciary responsibility. So that takes the liability off of the commission and leadership, as well as MERS takes that on for you. When we look, one of the questions that was asked was, how does a defined benefit plan work? How does a defined contribution plan work? And how does a hybrid work? And so I put up the hybrid formula because it's a piece of defined benefit and a piece of defined contribution to kind of consolidate that into one thing. So if you look at part one, for those who were with the city for several years, it's been since I think 2007, I think. So they were all in the defined benefit plan, and that's based on a formula, final average compensation. So salary, think salary over an average over 3 or 5 years, times years of service. So how many years and months they've worked for the city, times the benefit multiplier. And there are different multipliers, and you can see that in the annual valuation that was provided to you, equals an annual benefit they'll get for the rest of their life. And that's something that's guaranteed. It doesn't fluctuate with the market share or with what the market does. Rather, that fluctuates based on the funding of that. And so that's a conversation that we've had a lot with the city. But from an employee standpoint, that's how the formula works. For defined contribution, then the city went to defined contribution for a period of time where that's employer and employee have a percentage of their pay put into an investment account. The employee chooses what type of investment they would like, more aggressive, more conservative. They, based on their earnings and losses in the market and fees, that gives them an account balance. They can use that towards retirement, similar to a 401k, but it is a 401a. Then the city back in 2011, I think 11 and 12, I think, it was smattered across all different divisions, but you switch to a hybrid plan where it's a portion of the defined benefit and a portion of the defined contribution together to give them a benefit. Okay. Any questions on that? I know that was one thing that you wanted me to cover. Okay. Yeah.
Is everyone under the hybrid plan now?
You have just a few that are still in the defined benefit plan, and that is your public safety, your police and fire. Great question. Yeah. Anything else? All righty. So when we look at your open provisions, I kind of wrote a lot of it down so you could kind of see that. You have 16 divisions that are closed. So the majority of your defined benefit plan, they're closed. Only police and fire are open. The rest of the divisions are in hybrid. For most divisions, the employee contribution rate is 3%. It varies a little bit in your hybrid plans, 3.5 for the most part. And then that changes based on the division they're in as far as the employer contribution. There was a question on what was included in the wages, specifically on overtime, and that is included. So there are the regular wages, PTO, used on-call pay, there's some lead worker pay, additional 457, shift differentials, overtime, acting pay, and then there are lump sums as far as longevity, merit pay, job certifications, education, car allowance, some of those kind of things. So that is what's all included in that. And I know that was one of the questions of what's included in the formula as far as that final average compensation.
Can I make one clarification? For the police and fire open defined benefit groups, those are modified benefits from the original kind of similar fire, similar police. So those are modified benefits, and overtime is not a reportable wage for those two defined benefit groups.
So police and fire do not get overtime built in.
Correct.
For those in the older DB plan, there's a 10-year vesting, and that does include the police and fire. And then we have for the hybrid vesting, the DB portion is a 6-year vesting, and the DC portion, they get 25% of the employer contribution until they reach 4 years, which is 100%. Then for normal retirement age is age 60, but there is an early unreduced retirement benefit for police and fire, which is age 55 with 25 years of service. And then for the police supervisor is the only open division that has an automatic non-compounding 2.5% cost of living adjustment. Any additional questions on that?
So make sure I understand what early unreduced retirement means.
So they are able to take their full benefit at age 55 instead of waiting till 60, as long as they have 25 years of service. And there's no reduction to that. There's the ability for them, for others to take it early, but it's a 0.5% reduction per month they go early. So it really cuts down their benefit. But with public safety, and we see that often with public safety, that you have something that's a little younger because of the nature of their work.
And remember, when we go through, when you see public safety, remember they don't have Social Security, correct? So that's why everything looks, right, that may be why everything looks high to you, but you got to remember we're not paying our half of Social Security for them because they will not have Social Security from us.
And are we unusual about not paying Social Security, or is that common for everyone?
It's mixed across the state. There are some that do and some that don't. So it's pretty mixed. I don't have an average or numbers or anything like that, but yeah,
So new hires in police and fire are in the DB plan?
they are Correct. Alrighty. So when we look at the annual valuation, which is the report that you get on an annual basis that talks about how do you pay for this defined benefit plan, this defined benefit plan side of hybrid. And one of the things is we want to pre-fund the benefits. So there's employer and employee contributions and then investment earnings. And just for a statistic for you to know, investment earnings fund more than half or about half of the retirement benefits that are paid out. So that can be really good because it would be a lot more expensive if you were funding that completely upfront without any of the investment returns. So I know you were provided the annual valuation that comes out. That's a snapshot of your plan as of the end of the year. It provides the contribution rates for the next fiscal year. And it projects the promised benefits, does not determine, it's obviously doesn't determine the actual cost, the benefits determine the actual cost, but it projects out what the cost may be, again, with fluctuations from the assumption perspective. And then there's also some information in that report on GASB, which is Governmental Accounting Standards Board for that reporting, and state reporting for like PA 202 and other things like that. There were some questions about what assumptions are used. And so we kind of divide them into two distinct areas. Demographic assumptions look at things like the number of people working, how many are retired, when will they retire, how long do we think they're going to live, life expectancy tables, things like that. And then we have economic assumptions, which are forward-looking trends that look at things like wage growth, future investment return, expectations, things like that. But that's in general. There's 40 plus different assumptions underneath there, but that gives you a general idea. But were there any questions specifically in regards to the assumptions there? Yeah.
So would those work for like our plan specifically, or are you looking at like all the municipalities together?
So
Like if we have
for,
a young unit,
yep.
are you saying like, oh, there'll be a lot of market growth with this group, so the dollars that we need today are going to be less than a fire department that had a bunch of older workers?
So yes to both. And I know that sounds weird, but to some of the economic assumptions like wage growth and things where you need the big macro numbers, we definitely use that across the systems perspective. But then when we look at your individual demographics, like we've got 10 about to retire, or they're all really young, as you mentioned, the gender that they are, because we're on a life expectancy table that is gender specific. And it is generational specific. So the more young 20-year-olds that you have, your plan's going to be more expensive because they're expected to live longer than if you have a bunch of 50-year-old males, which are going to not live as long, statistically, right? I'm not broadcasting that to everyone, but that's what it is. So it is a mix of both. Absolutely. All right. And then there was a question around market value of assets versus actuarial value of assets. So the market value of assets that you see in that report is the actual assets that are held in the plan. And it's also in the fiduciary net position. And it's on your quarterly statements. And then we use the actuarial value of assets where we smooth the asset value. And we can talk a little bit more about that in a minute, where we smooth that asset value. And so it's different, but it gives that from a budgeting perspective, you don't do this constant roller coaster. It's a little bit more of a smooth, predictable thing for your budget. We also we do an experience study every 5 years. So you can set an assumption. And if you're looking 40 years out, boy, there's a lot of wiggle room there, right? And so when we set that assumption, when we're looking at 40 years out, we also check our assumptions every 5 years. So we look at the experience of what actually happened in your plan over the last 5 years, and we compare that to the assumptions. If there are statistical differences, we have to make adjustments to those assumptions. And so we do that every 5 years. The 24 valuation that you received, we had just completed our experience study. So that is the freshest, newest numbers. And so you'll see that happen every 5 years. And if there are assumption changes, we will make that at that time. In the 24 valuation, we didn't see a lot of changes to the assumptions this time. We've made a lot of adjustments in past years that some of you may, if you've been following, have seen that before. But this year, this experience study, there wasn't a lot of significant changes. One other piece that I wanted to talk about really quickly is, and then we'll get out of the theory and into your numbers, but this theory kind of sets the stage for all the numbers you're going to see. Dedicated gains is a policy that is automatic, that reduces the investment return based on investment return when we exceed expectations. So, for example, we don't have the final official numbers, but our assumption last year was 6.93. We had a 15% return or above a 15% return. I don't have the exact 15 point whatever yet. It's still through the audit, but obviously it's exceeded that. So that would trigger our dedicated gains policy for our 2025 valuation, which means that 6.93 could be lowered and most likely will be lowered based on that thing. So what's happened in the past, and I know I'm looking at Jill because she was in a situation where worked for when we had our 2015 and 2019 changes in our experience study where we had to adjust the investment return from 8% to 7.75 to 7.35. And that was without dedicated gains. And so that increased the cost to the municipality immediately. And that's something that the city of Lansing saw in their plans. We have moved to dedicated gains, where as we see financial gains, we immediately put that in there versus smoothing that out over 5 years, which gives you the chance to utilize those dollars and bring that assumption down versus having it just go on to your increase in your budget. So that's something that's
So you do not smooth the dedicated gains.
correct. It goes into the plan immediately, those gains.
And you may think that the difference between 8 and 7.5, that's 0.5%. What can it be? It's
It's
huge.
huge.
It's a huge number in what the city's contribution would be increased by.
So in general, well, you're gonna get to East Lansing numbers, never mind.
We are, yep. So this gives you an idea, as I mentioned before. So in 2015, it moved to 7.75. In 19, it moved to 7.35. In 2021, we moved to dedicated gains, and we used the 2022 or 2020 and 2021 numbers to move that down to 7%. Brought that down in 2023 to 6.93. It stayed the same at 6.93 for 2024. And again, as I mentioned, we had a really great investment year last year. So when the board looks at all of that and makes that decision, then there will be an announcement that should be end of this month, where you see what that looks like and what the dedicated gains will come out in the next valuation, but it won't be impacting that until your 2027 budget year. Okay. So now we're going to go into the valuation that you have, and some of you may have it in front of you. If not, I can also switch over to get to that. But you can see from the executive summary, East Lansing is funded at 70% last year. In the 2023 valuation, you were funded at 67%. So moving forward, there was a question of how many municipalities are funded with us, higher than us, lower than us. So I put those statistics in there. 194, municipalities are funded between 70 and 79%. 344 municipalities are higher than that group, and 212 are lower. So you're kind of in the middle of the pack. Yes.
Are there some commonalities between the groupings? In other words, those 344 municipalities that are funded higher, are they richer? What?
There's not in that way. It depends on how they've, again, how young their plan is, how old their plan is, how, we've had groups that were well-funded and it was a small group and suddenly there were 2 disabilities. And if you have a plan of 6 people and two go on disability, that could really upset the numbers, right? Immediately. And then you have larger plans like the city of East Lansing that have a long history. They had some richer benefits. They've adjusted those benefits. You've moved to hybrid and done some of those things, and you're funding that over time. So you're moving up the scale, and I have others that have not had to do that. And I've had others that have just put in a lot of contributions right up front and were able to do that. So it's a mixed bag. There's not like, oh, it's all cities or all counties or all road commissions, or it's really a mixed bag. And it depends on your history, your individual history, and what plans you offered at the time as well in history, for sure. I wish I could give you more. It'd be so nice to just point to something and be done, but it's not that simple. I also wanted to talk about asset smoothing, as we mentioned before. This is something that in your valuation, so we talked about the market return for 2024 was actually 7.28%. But because the smoothing, we're still smoothing out the losses of 2022, which was a -10. So when you're smoothing that out over 5 years, you still see the return is 3.79%. And so that's why the great story is East Lansing, instead of going down in funding, still went up in funding because you've been putting in additional. Some groups actually went down because that smoothing is still in place. Do you want me to go over what smoothing is, or does that feel like everybody feels comfortable with that? Because I can skip over that slide. Feel comfortable with it? Okay, I'll skip over this. I had some graphics. All right, there we go. So now we're going to go into your funding projections. I don't know if any of you have your valuation up front, but I can also turn to that. Would that be easier for me to hop out of this presentation and go through the valve that way on the bigger screen? Okay. Okay, I can do that. So let me just pull that up. No, you're good. Oh, yes. Let's see if I can get this a little bigger. All right. So as I mentioned, you're 70% funded. The page I want to go to is this page here, where the first section shows you can see here. So the question was, when are we going to get to a certain funding level? When are we going to hit 80%? When are we going to get 100%? And some of those questions. So I thought this would be really helpful to look at. You'll see we use a couple different assumptions. The solid blue line is the 6.93 assumption. The red dotted line is 5.93, and the purple line is 4.93. So that is, if I have some groups that budget based on a lower assumption because they're trying to catch up from a perspective. But this solid blue line is what is required, and you'll see this dotted blue line above it. That is where you're actually funded because you have been putting aside extra dollars into the surplus division. So you've been putting in additional contributions than what's required to kind of get to a better funding level faster. And that's been the goal. Yes.
Couple things. Can you explain what surplus division means?
Sure.
My understanding from reading, knowing I don't know a lot about this stuff, that whatever we put in this division
Sure.
doesn't count toward estimating our annual contribution.
Correct. Okay. Yeah.
And then did you require the additional funding, or did we as the city say we need to up this?
No, it's an option that we offer. It is completely the city's decision. Did you want to say something? Jill?
Yeah, that's the income tax money. That's the extra.
I understand, but we're also still putting general fund in there too, right?
Right, but the income tax is the supplemental. Whatever they tell us we're required to do comes out of regular funding, correct?
Correct, but there is a distinction between the surplus division.
Yeah.
And that does not one-to-one match supplemental contributions from the income tax. So a majority of it is now going into surplus, but surplus means something different than just supplemental contributions.
And that's where I'm
Yeah.
confused. Thank you.
But the income tax was supposed to be in addition to whatever the regular contribution was supposed to be.
Right, and it always has been, but it either went into individual divisions or now we've switched it to the surplus. I will let Marnie explain what the difference is.
Yes. So what happens is, there are all of the divisions that have the different people in. So you have your police, you have your fire division, you have your, non-union division, all those different divisions. And so from a plan perspective, you have a required contribution. And if you put additional money in, we automatically lower your payment for the next year because we count it as pre-funding. Because that is what we're required to do in these individual divisions. So what MERS created was a surplus division so that you could put additional dollars in to help with funding, but it wouldn't change those required contributions. So you would still, if you're looking at going, we've got several people about to retire, we want our trajectory to still keep going up because we want to pay for that. We don't want our additional dollars to artificially lower that because that's just for the funding level to try to bring the whole plan up. So what happens is for a while, the city was saying, yep, we're going to put additional dollars in, and they're putting it right into the divisions. And then after a while, the philosophy changed and we moved it saying, okay, we're going to put there are some additional contributions into the regular divisions, and now we're putting into the surplus. So this dotted line doesn't represent all of the additional dollars the city has been putting in.
What does it represent then?
What you've been putting in, how many years?
So just the, well, so does that count the pension surplus and the other surplus? Because now we have two surplus divisions.
Yeah,
and I like
these
both of
includes
them. Yeah,
both.
that's both of them. A couple of years have we just put it into the surplus division. I think, well, I do actually have a chart that shows, no, never mind. It just shows supplemental, doesn't show
Okay.
the breakdown.
So were we putting extra in for the other years, or did that artificially lower the next year's contribution so that extra wasn't being put in?
We're always, not always, since maybe 2017, we were putting money, supplemental contributions into the pension over and above the required contribution. But yes, they were going to division, so it was reducing a future required contribution because we were trying to do expenses of the general fund, but we weren't making enough ground, so we changed course to put it in the surplus division.
No, that makes. Okay, so you can see that in this graph, you can see that you're now overfunded. So if you were looking at this graph before, I'm going to show you a chart.
Overfunded for what? Overfunded.
Sorry, I didn't want to say overfunded. You are over what your normal expectation. So if you just been paying the normal or annual required contribution or the ARC, you would be 65% funded. You are 70% funded. So that's why you see this blue line at 65% and you see this dotted blue line at 70% funded to show you that you've been making progress from that perspective. So you're going to hit 80% funded a couple years before you would have done if you'd just been paying the required contributions.
What's our target? Is it 80%, 90%?
100%.
Why 100%? Nobody's gonna retire all at the same time.
Sure. So it's 100% from the unfunded accrued liability. So we have what's called a and I'm going to get into that in just a minute, but it's where we have a fixed amortization schedule. And so we're taking all of that unfunded liability of the past years and we're spreading it out. And I'm going to go down to a chart right below this, right? Oops. Doesn't want to go slow. See this large climb and then this drop off? That's when that unfunded accrued liability, the legacy liability that you've been trying to pay off, is fully paid off.
What year is that?
That is about 2038, 2039. But because you've been putting in the surplus, you're actually going to hit 100% funded before that. And that was the whole point of those additional contributions.
When are we gonna hit 100%? What year?
And again, this is forecasting out, I can't promise, this is just general numbers, but the 100% you can see in this graph shows you at about 2037, 2036, 2037.
About 10 years out.
Get to 100%.
So I just want to make sure I understand the test. So if everything worked out according to plan on 2037, we would stop making the surplus payment because there'd be no reason for it.
Correct. And you would actually probably stop a little bit beforehand because you'd want to use those surplus dollars for those last few years.
Okay, then what year could we stop using? Could we move those surplus dollars into our regular?
That is a judgment call. So I have some groups that they want to not touch that surplus division until they are over 100% funded. They want to have a cushion. So if there's a market change, they don't have that increase. I have others that are like, you know what, we're getting close. We're in the 90s. We're going to start utilizing those surplus divisions assets for a time.
It's a city council call.
It is 100%, yes. We will provide numbers and data and things like that, but it is definitely their call.
Is there any rule of thumb that municipalities are using in general?
The only main rule of thumb from PA 202 is that you want to stay above 60% funded. That's something that across the board, people are trying to stay there, which the city has worked really hard to do so. And so now you're at 70% funded. So that's definitely the litmus test that I think everybody is held accountable with Treasury and everything else. Other than that, it depends on their story, right? Like I have some groups that they're very close to 100% funded. And so it depends on the board makeup at the time of how conservative or how aggressive they want to be. It also depends on where the cost goes. So you can see here, you have a pretty healthy incline right here. So they may look at it and go, okay, right now we're at a $10 million contribution. If once we get from a budget perspective to about 13 million or 14 million, that's kind of our ceiling. And so we may have to say at 13 or 14 million, we're going to budget 13 million. And then this next year, even though the cost is 14 million, we're going to take $1 million off that surplus to kind of cap off that spike at the end, because then it's going to drop way down to 5 million. So I have some that like to smooth it out over time and some that really want that bank and they want that 100% before they do that.
Can somebody refresh my memory? What year does the income tax expire? 31.
Fiscal year 31, it ends calendar year 2030.
Something else on this. I know you're making your presentation, but I got the feeling there isn't a lot of background on what we were looking at when we were at the financial health team last time, which was a projection that within about 10 years of that period, so 2027, our entire amount of property tax revenue would be required to pay our minimum annual contribution. So that was the precipitator on the recommendations, I think, of the financial health team to go with the income tax. So when we talk about 2037, it's important to remember that 6 years before that, we will not have an income tax at this point in time. So we don't have the ability to make additional contributions unless this body make some kind of a recommendation with regard to how we're gonna handle that, which would mean we're never getting to 100% based on the system that would be in place starting in 2031. So it is a financial issue for us, and it's one of the things that we put together the financial health team to take a look at and make recommendations to council as to how we should deal with this. So this is we're getting the sort of the good plan today, but the reality is we have to do something about 2031 or 2030 in order to maintain this progress that we're looking at right now. When we passed the income tax, we had a number of projections, including one that looked remarkably like one of the ones that you showed up on the screen, that indicated that by the end of our income tax, we would accomplish the 100% that we were looking for and reduce our required annual contribution. I can't remember, to like 1.7 million or somewhere in that, which is a huge plus for us. But we haven't gotten there yet. And it doesn't look like we can, because of course we didn't plan on COVID. We didn't plan on a crash in the economy. We didn't plan on any of this stuff. And of course, we're always sort of at the mercy of MERS, because when they change their assumptions, if the assumptions change, that increases our unfunded liability. So when we reduce the amount of money to be earned on an annual basis, that increases the amount of money that we need to have to reach our 100%. So I just wanted to give that background there.
I'm sorry, I don't remember the income tax law. Can you tell me when a city adopts an income tax on a ballot, do they have to set an expiration date, or could we have put that ballot measure on forever?
We are not required to have an expiration date. That was part of the sales pitch, was that we advertised pretty heavily what we saw as the projections, because the objective was to get to a very comfortable spot with very little annual contribution necessary by the end of the income tax. And we predicted that would be 12 years. And that's why we went in that direction. But you could make a recommendation that we remove the sunset and continue that, or alter it in any way and make a recommendation with regard to that.
This chart. Is there any way to avoid this cliff? Because, we're talking about the general fund, is really tight to make these annual contributions up until 2038. And then boy, aren't we going to feel great in 2039. Is there any way that we can avoid that? Or is that kind of MERS requirement to get us that funding level?
Sure. So this is based on the fixed amortization schedule that is in place. There is the ability for you to apply for an extended amortization, which means you just extend that amortization out a little longer. So it lowers the cliff a little bit. But in the end, it costs you more in the end, right? Because you're spreading that out and not having the money in the assets that you would need. There is an actuarial study that needs to be done and even get approval from Gabriel Roeder Smith, our external actuaries, because of the fact that we have to look at the life expectancy, that you can't extend your amortization past the life expectancy of who you're going to be paying out, right? Because then you'll run out of money. So there's this moment of, are you fiscally sound enough? Is there enough time? Is there enough runway for us to be able to extend that amortization? And in some places that is the case, and in some places it is not. Yeah.
So I thought you told us that you need at least 60% to be funded to keep Treasury happy and the state happy. Some people aim for 80%, some people aim for 100%. I'm not understanding how your amortization discussion then fits into, we could stop whenever we want as long as we were at 60+%.
No, you're not stopping something at 60%. So PA 202 was don't be below the 60% and make sure you have a plan to be at least 80% in the next certain number of years. So they also had an amortization.
So is that the amortization schedule you're speaking of right now?
No, we're speaking of the MERS amortization schedule, because ours goes up to 100% of that legacy debt. You're always going to have fluctuations, and we have layered amortization because it's, when you get to 2038, 2039, it's not like everything's going to be perfect again. We live with a market and people volatility and all of those things. So we have a layered amortization to try to keep that within 10 years instead of letting it go for 30 years, which can build that mountain. So learning from the past, adjusting it forward. But this is the amortization schedule to get you that legacy debt that was accrued many years ago for the city, their story, to try to get that paid off in time, because we want to get to intergenerational equity, meaning the generation that's working now is not paying for the past generation, that they are paying, you're paying for the benefit that they're earning currently today. So you're not building debt for the future. And so that's why that fixed amortization schedule is there, is because of intergenerational equity.
And that is a MERS requirement.
That is correct. To keep it healthy. And we have to have something like that in order for the actuaries to even approve the plan. So some of it's deemed by MERS and some of it's the actuaries going, you have to be within certain standards or we won't even certify you. So there's a little bit of both. Yeah, absolutely. Okay.
We covered this, but the requirement every year does not take into consideration how badly unfunded the city is.
It does. So
Does.
it does. So there's a mix of that. I'm going to go back to the presentation for a second, because this was a question.
And I think if you're gonna ask a question, just make sure your mic is maybe not behind your screen, because I think it can't pick you up. Your mic is behind your screen, so it can't pick you up. It's on, it just wasn't.
So you were asking if the unfunded liability is a part of the annual required contribution. Yeah. So
I'm wondering how it gets so bad if it's part of, it's probably an oversimplification.
So it used to be that there was what's called a rolling amortization. It wasn't a fixed amortization. So essentially you're re-amortizing for another 30 years every year. And so that was something that was very traditional because across the country, because municipalities never go bankrupt. Nothing ever happens like that, right? Well, that was the history of that. That is not true anymore. And so a lot of that has changed the whole landscape of pensions, right? So decisions were made back in the day that we'll just keep paying on this because we're always going to be here. I'm not saying the city's not going to be here, but what I am saying is because there is the ability for bankrupts, because there is that looming threat, there was a lot of changes to how the government, how the federal government, how different states, how they look at these liabilities and say, no, we want to have a time where you're going to pay off this liability. And so that's moved that fixed amortization to a set amount. So that puts a little pressure on you, well, right where you're here, right? Because you have this legacy debt and you have the current actuarial. So we actually have something where it shows, we put the normal cost. So we look at what it costs for everybody that's actively in the plan to earn another year of service in that plan. And so that's that's part of the equation. And then we take your unfunded liabilities. So if it's $10 million and we take that and we spread that out over 15 years, we're going to give that amount. That's that unfunded payment, that UAL or unfunded accrued liability. We add those two together to get that required contribution. Does that help? Did that answer the
Thanks.
question? Absolutely.
And I don't know whether we have this information, but I think it would be helpful for you to have sort of the history of unfunded liability for the city. Because one of the things that I thought was demonstrated us at the last financial health team was that in the 2008 crash, we lost about 50% of the value of our funded liability. So that's another thing we're still dealing with at this point in time.
Audrey, can you look at page 28 of the actuarial report?
Okay. Do you want me to switch back on that? You're saying 28. Okay. You're going to jump way ahead for me, Jill.
Well, it's on the contribution.
Yeah.
Okay, so the required contribution and then the additional contribution for 24 were both $9.5 million. Was the additional contribution all from the income tax?
I provided, as another attachment to the agenda,
Mm,
a history of the required versus supplemental contributions. And I can pull that up maybe when Marnie is done.
Okay,
or-
all right.
But it will show, general fund versus income tax on that as well.
Okay, so we put 20 million, 19 million in. And then you'll show the split of that. Okay, all right, thank you.
I'm gonna jump back in your valuation for a second, just to show you table 1. Because this is where we show that normal cost based on the actual, what's happening with the city, not just theory. So when I explained to you what normal cost is, what percentage it costs for those employees to earn another year of service in the formula. So you can see, for example, Division 20's got 19%, Division 21's 18%, Division 23 is 12%. And then you get down into your hybrids, which is much lower because they have an additional DC on the side. So you've reduced that down to like 8 and 6%. So that's that percent of payroll. And then, so then you can see we calculate the employer normal cost. So if East Lansing were 100% funded today, just magically, ta-da, the annual required contribution would be $2,354,916. Okay. But then we take that payment of that unfunded liability, that legacy debt that we're paying off, that big legacy debt over the next 15 years. And that payment is 7.6, almost 7.7 million. So when we add it together, that's where we get to that $10 million amount. So you can see it's not the plans and the things that you offer today, the benefits you offer today, you're still paying off legacy debt. That's your bigger number. And so that's why that income tax was also there. We've got to pay off this legacy debt piece to that. And you made a lot of adjustments to your current plans, meaning we went to hybrid, we went to lower plans for the police, we went to some of those things, to police and fire, to speak to how do we make this less expensive on a going forward basis, and then how do we pay off that legacy debt? Because once it's earned, it's been accrued and it cannot be diminished. So it's not something you can go back and go, just kidding, you were supposed to get this payment, now you're only going to get this. That's against the Michigan State Constitution. So, but this shows you that normal cost, that unfunded liability together to get you to that contribution amount. The next several pages are what the provisions are and the multipliers and benefits. So if you want to look into that and you have more questions on that, you can do that. And then there were some questions of how many people we have in different plans. That's the next table 3. So if you ever want to look through that, you can do so. But to give you an idea, you can see as of the end of 2024, there were 305 active employees, 124 vested former, meaning they've worked here, they're vested, they'll someday get a benefit. They're just not age eligible to draw yet. And then you have 425 that are currently drawing. So you have more drawing that are in the plan. And so that makes it more challenging, right? Because more money's going out the door than it's coming in from a contribution perspective. And so that makes it even harder to catch up. So to your question before of some of these groups, maybe it's easier for them to catch up because they have a younger group. And so they have more actives than retirees. And so that makes it much easier to kind of dig out of that hole than the other way around. So the history of this city is also a portion of why you're in the place that you're in, right? When we go back to table 5, which is my favorite table, so I was excited when Jill brought it up. I was like, not ready yet for it, but I was excited, was that cash flow, because I think it's important to look at that from just take all the theory away, let's just look at cash flow. And so as she pointed out, you put in $19 million in the employee contributions, and then you have the investment income, which was another $6.7 million that earned, that's that smooth value. But the payments going out the door were 15.855. So again, what's you're putting in is 19, but 15.8 is going out the door. It's really hard to catch up when so much is going out the door, right? So that makes that cash flow challenging, right? But you're doing the right thing of more is going in than what's going out. I have some groups that are having more go out than what they're putting in. And then that could be really challenging to catch up from that perspective. But the question still remains, when there's not that income tax, so there's not that additional coming in, what do you do with that? Because those benefit payments, as you can see, it was 11, 12, 13, 14, now it's 15, it's almost 16 million. Your benefits are still, those payments going out, you're still gonna have more people retiring soon. So you're gonna have more cash going out. How do you balance that with that change in that income tax, if that makes sense? So that's something that you're looking at. And then table 6 is kind of the final table. And then I can answer any other questions that you may have. But this table is broken down, going too fast, by all of the divisions, what their funding level is, what assets they currently have, and what unfunded liabilities are still in there. And so when we ask, how much of our unfunded liability are we still paying off over the next 15 years? The answer is almost 72 million. So why is that payment so high? Because you're trying to pay off 72 million in the next 15 years. So it's not like we're talking about 10 million, right? Because that would be something that I'm sure the city would just love.
You said 10 million earlier.
You're like, yay. And I knew it wasn't that. I was like, as an example, just round numbers, but it's 72 million. So you still have a chunk of change that you're still working to pay off. And that's really the conversation that the city is faced with.
And you can see here, this is a nice place to see those two surplus divisions. You can see the valuation of those is a total of about 12 million, but our annual required contribution is about 10 million right now. So we can chunk off 1 year, or we could take $1 million off of 12 years. And I mean, and again, we are planning to continue to contribute to those divisions, because this was as of not last December, but the prior. So we have already put more in these surplus divisions for all of the income tax funds. So,
But just so I'm clear again, but if we did that, if we essentially chewed up our surplus to keep our rates relatively stable that we're paying in, we would be, I forget the old saying, but we'd be at a point where we'd be now reducing our funded level over time again. We'd be going from 70% to 69% to.
so can you explain, there's a difference between using our surplus versus contributing to divisions when we do a supplemental?
So I think what you're asking is, so when there's the, if we looked at it and we said, okay, 2031, there's no more income tax, that doesn't continue. And now we have this bill of it's going from 13 million to 14 million to 15 million, that kind of thing. If we use some of that surplus to offset that for a few years, it wouldn't change your funding level because that's accounted for already in there.
It wouldn't change my rate, but now I'm dropping down and.
You're dropping down the assets that are in your reserve. But that's already counted towards your funding level. So that's already counted as the whole. But it could mean if you only have, let's say if you want to stay at 12 million, and so you're going to use 3 million a year, you may run out of money, and then suddenly your bill is going to go up to 15 million because you don't have enough reserves. Is that
I
what you're?
guess that's the point I'm trying to make.
Yep, I think that's what you're. If you use that up in a certain amount of time and there's still some unfunded liability left towards the end. So that's the balancing act, right?
But if we started using like 1 million of it to reduce our general fund contribution and kept putting the income tax money in, it would just slow our increase in rate of return. Right? It wouldn't reduce it, it would just slow the increase.
Slow the growth. Yes, there you go.
Can you walk us through this?
That's
chart?
mine. I can do that.
Do you want me to unplug?
Do you want to talk about that now, or do we want to talk
Oh,
about?
I'm sorry.
Or do you have more?
I think that was mostly, I just wanted to make sure you guys felt comfortable.
Oh, you were gonna walk us through the East Lansing specific numbers.
Those were the numbers that I was
That's
doing.
what you-
Yep. But if you want to know a little bit more, I'll just show this really quick. Because there's a lot of concepts that that handed to you, and it's not something that we normally hear on a day-to-day basis. So if you go into our website, you don't have to log in. You just go to mersofmish.com. We have a lot of videos out there about explaining dedicated gains, explaining smoothing, explaining the whole valuation. So you can take your valuation and follow along and kind of look at your numbers while we're going through a video of that. So that's something that you can do right on our website. If you type in like AAV, annual actuarial evaluation, we bring up a lot of different resources. So if you're wanting to get a little bit more familiar with this, that would be a great resource that you can do on your own. So I just wanted to give you some more resources so you didn't feel like you were like, well, I've got to call that crazy redhead. You can literally, you can look at a lot of those videos as well. So I wanted to leave that with you.
You gave us stats on how many are above 70%, but about how many do you have that are 100% funded?
I can pull that up. I pulled that from our website. So we also have that on our website. It's a publication called Your Partner in Retirement. So if you go to that search bar on the MERS of Mish website, yes. And you may have, I think we did hand that out to you. So on page, I think it's on page 4 of that handout. There are 96 municipalities that are 100% plus. There's 87 that were in the 90s.
And there's some mature plans in there, right?
Oh, yeah.
They aren't all new.
Oh, yeah. Mhm. So that
Yeah.
gives you an idea of the
Thank you.
scope, and it's on our website as well. Yeah. Mhm.
These are just ones that MERS covers, right?
Correct.
Okay.
Yes,
That's one
absolutely. Mhm.
On table 5,
Mhm.
I'd like to say, can you give us the benefit payments for the next 10 years? But that's probably all figured in your, that's figured in your current request indirectly, probably.
So we forecast out the first 5 years. So in that, just before that graph that we gave you, we do on page 12. We show that what it's going to look like through July 1 of 2031. So kind of right at that magic moment right there for you. Where the required contributions, and again, this is assuming that the marketplace is perfect and everybody retires and lives exactly how none of it's going to be, it's not going to be these numbers. I can promise you that. But it gives you a forecast. And so it moves from a required amount of 10 million, by 2031, it's 12.7 million.
But you don't put in the report what you think the benefits are going to be forward, right? You don't project those out. I think that was her question.
Oh, benefits?
Yeah.
No.
And wouldn't it have to be?
I mean, it's included in those numbers. That's why that's there, but I guess maybe I don't
And
understand.
you would have a scale that shows like this individual will reach their life expectancy and those benefits will fall off and this person will
Yes.
probably jump on, but at a lower rate and
Yes, that's all in that mix.
Any other questions?
I have one question just on this table 5 to make sure that I'm reading it correctly. The valuation asset balance in 2024 was 172 million. So you had mentioned the rate of return was 15 point some odd percent.
That's for 2025.
Correct. So assuming that 171, is that our invested balance? Like, did we make 15% off of that?
So it would be on your, all the assets in the plan.
So like 2025, then roughly the investment income would have been about 25 million. 15% of 171 is about 25 million. Your benefit payment, 16 million. So essentially 2025, that should have been like $10 million right there. Plus whatever we contributed on top of that, right? And I understand that you reset the numbers and all that. But
That's
like,
not in here yet. but
right,
yes.
so then we should,
Valuation you'll be getting in at the end of June of this year. Will,
we should have made a pretty significant jump then.
but remember, it's smoothed out over 5 years.
Well, the 10 million doesn't get smoothed out. That immediately gets added to the 171, right? If there was a 15% rate of return on the 171, that's a $25 million.
That's in market value, but for smooth value, this number, it would be smoothed out over 5 years.
But this isn't the smooth number. This is
Would be
actually what our investments are on table 5, right?
Table 5 is smooth.
Oh, it is smooth. Oh,
Table 5 is smooth.
Oh,
Table
okay.
4 is market value.
So then, could you give me a brief definition of what smooth means, like with some examples? Because I saw earlier it goes from like 7% to 3.5%. Like, I don't understand how you would forecast and smooth it out that much. That doesn't seem like smoothing.
Yeah.
Copying it.
So, as an example, let's say there's a loss. So 2010 was a significant loss, the largest loss we've had since 2008. So it's a significant loss. So you have this loss, and then for the next, so over the next 5 years, you'll experience a 20% of that loss, right? To get you to that 5 years, right? So then let's say the next year you have a gain, a higher gain, like we did in 2023. We would spread that gain out over the next 5 years. And so when you look at our appendix, so in that valuation that you have, there's a link to the appendix. You can also find that in our website as well. You can kind of see this triangle kind of pyramid look, because you'll see, for example, the loss of 2022. You'll see that loss coming through the system for 5 years, and you'll see all of the different gains. Now, what convolutes that a little bit on purpose is the dedicated gains, right? Because we're still trying to bring that assumption number down. And so as we do that, we're trying to do that, not increasing your costs as much as possible. So what we're doing is we're using, okay, we have a gain of 15%. We were assuming like a little less than 7. So we can use that to buy down that assumption from 693 to maybe, and I don't know the number yet, but 6.8 or 6.7 or something like that, which would help you in the future. And it helps buy that down versus we just spike your cost going up. But this is how smoothing works. And so then if you look at the next chart, you can see that dark green line that's very roller coaster like. It would be a fun ride, but that is the actual return. And then you see that assumption, which is that gray line, that 693, and then you see the smooth rate of return. So again, it smooths out that major dip, but even though you have some gains, it's going to cover that over. Again, then you have a positive. So it shows you where that 379 is coming in.
So it's just a rolling 5-year average.
In some ways,
You
it's not
know?
an average. It's definitely, it's taking those chunks. So I don't know how else to explain it except for like if I have 20% of each that loss, if it's 3%, I'm gonna have 3% for the next 5 years. And then that gain.
So
maybe
you're
is
gonna drop
1%
off the
over.
oldest year and add the newest year across 5 years.
So have you guys ever looked back and like maybe say you took a snapshot today or 10 years ago and then said, hey, we smoothed it out and we said this is where they'd be on this date, and then here's where they're like where the actual went. Because like this smoothing, I've never seen that used before. The average bad market lasts 2 years, the average good market lasts 9 years. So to take a 1 year bad and utilize that for the next 5 years.
It used to be, so it used to be the standard to always have smoothing of 10 years, and then it moved to a standard of 5 years across the country. So in pension systems, this is actually very standard. But what I can show you is, I'm jumping to all the different things, but I'm going to show you in that your partner in retirement, that report, that additional thing that you have, we actually show this particular graph. Goodness gracious. where it shows, for example, let's say in 1976 to December of 2025, because we're just looking at a long time period. If you had $10,000, what would the growth of those assets be? Okay, so you can see in the blue, we assumed you would make $422,255. But what the actual returns were 747. And so that gives you an idea of what that assumption versus where that goes. And all of that includes that smoothing. So it kind of gives you an idea. You mentioned that growth of $1 that gives you an idea of what the performance of MERS has been over that time period and where you're much better off than just going, here's what our assumption, we were just going to get this flat rate. We want what the market does, even though there are ups and downs, even though we're smoothing in and out. I don't know if that helped at all, but.
The table before it has 160,000 or 160 million. That's our actual assets?
That was the market value of assets.
Then the assessed one is higher than that.
Correct. Because we're not done smoothing out some of those losses.
So when people say they're 100% funded, are they 100% funded at market value or actuarial?
Actuarial. Some are at both, but actuarial is what your bill is based on. So that's what most people look at. These are great questions.
Did you want to talk about that chart that I provided?
Yes,
Please.
please.
I'll
Okay.
have you stay, just in
Okay.
case there's questions,
Yep.
since it's related.
And then I can unplug.
Yes.
So you have control.
This one. Number 2.
So there was the request to see kind of where our required contributions were versus our supplemental contributions. And so I want to preface this with, I went over kind of a history of fiscal year, but the valuation is based on calendar year. So if you're trying to crosswalk, you're gonna have a little bit of trouble. And I was trying to provide it in the sort of simplest form. I can provide as much detail as you want, as many numbers as you want to this. And I can also kind of convert it to calendar year so that you can see it in the valuation. But so the red line is the required contribution. And then the stacked bars are the supplemental contributions. You can see fiscal year 2016 was the first year we started doing supplemental contributions. And the lower blue are contributions that are coming directly from the general fund. And then you can see in 2020, we started contributing from the income tax fund. So you can see that there's, the 1 year 24 is significantly higher, and that's not general fund numbers, that's a grant fund from the state of Michigan. So we received $7.6 million from the state of Michigan, and that was all contributed to a surplus division.
I'm sorry, what kind of funding was that?
It
What
was
kind
a-
of grant was it?
It was a grant that the state of Michigan put out that wanted to get municipalities more funded, funded,
Oh,
because
specifically
specifically for that purpose. So, and that's exact, and so the money didn't even come to the city, it went right to MERS. And they required it to go into a surplus division, specifically to help the funding ratio. So
Just curious, what happened with revenue sharing then?
I don't think our revenue sharing was impacted. I think it was just an appropriation within the state of Michigan's budget, and it was, I'm
Just wondered if.
You
they took
remember what
one
year that
to
was?
Give to the other.
fiscal year 24. So I think calendar year 23 is when it was contributed.
And by 2017, we were not the only community having a problem across the state of Michigan. In fact, a lot of them were. So I think this was a reaction within the legislature to try to get everybody over the hump so that we could get back on track.
And you can see in that table 5 that we were talking about, or table 6, excuse me, so the next page on that, where you'll see two surplus divisions, one surplus unassociated. That's the one that the city's been contributing to. And then you'll see one that says SG. It's specifically the surplus grant fund. So we've held it separate so you can see what came from the state. So for example, it was a little over 7.6 and now it's like 9.2. So you can kind of see where it is at, where it's growing. And so it's accounted for, it's still invested the same and all those things, but you can see that line item in your valuation.
I assume I can't see it very well. Those last 2 years are 25 and 26.
Yeah, 26 is estimated though,
Why isn't there any red or blue?
because the general fund stopped contributing surplus,
This is just the surplus,
supplemental,
the supplemental.
supplemental. And
Okay.
I
it's
did not
The total that we're
no,
contributing.
yeah, so you would have to add the red line plus the green bar to get what we are actually paying MERS year over year.
Okay,
So there is some general fund going to MERS in addition to the income tax.
Yes. Required contribution is paid out of the general fund, all the funds. Required contribution is allocated based on personnel that are related to those funds, required only. So we have a $10 million required contribution that is spread out over the general fund. So if you looked at my financial forecast, it's about 7.5 million for the general fund.
Let me rephrase it and see if I can ask it better. If we're required to submit 10 million and we get 10 million income tax in, do we put zero general fund in?
No, the income tax requires that it is contributed to supplemental only. It cannot be used for a required contribution.
Okay, of our total commitment we have to send to MERS, whether it's going to our regular annual rate or it's going to the surplus division, of that total amount, which is how much? Annual rate plus surplus division is how much in total? Is that
Like, you want me to estimate?
just a round number, 17? I can't quite remember.
if the required contribution is 10 million and you've got 6 million from income tax, you're paying 16 million.
Correct.
Okay, can you do a chart for us since the income tax started of what the required contribution was from the funds, what came from income tax, and then this special grant for 24, for a total of what the contributions were each year since the income
would
You
tax?
just want numbers, not graphs?
Yeah, I think so.
Because if,
I mean, I can show.
so you're saying all of the income tax has to go to the surplus division?
The 60% that goes to income.
Okay, then
it has-
all of the rest of our contribution going to MERS is being paid out of the general fund.
All the funds, I mean, it's split to all the funds, it's not all.
Right,
general
but
fund.
there's a general fund contribution,
Correct,
Yes.
which is what we're supposed to be looking at as the
Correct.
general fund.
correct.
So is this more helpful? So here's the required. I'm trying to do it on a laptop. Yeah. So here's 25, required contribution is 9.5 million. Supplemental was 5.3.
Okay, when you say supplemental, does that mean the same as surplus?
Necessarily. I didn't want to complicate this anymore. I mean, I can break it down into
The
when we.
supplemental is a piece coming from the income tax?
Yeah, so the red columns are what makes up the supplemental. So required. Then supplemental blue is made up of these two columns, general fund or grant funded, and then the income tax funded. So in 25 and 26, we're assuming that income tax is funding all of the supplemental contributions.
That's a really helpful chart if we could get it.
Some people don't like numbers as much as this group, so I try and do pictures, but I like numbers too. Okay. Will do. Perfect. Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, so I can show you this is how we've tracked our income tax versus surplus versus directed divisions. This is the history of all of that. Okay.
Doesn't even have to be pretty if we could just see the number.
Yeah, I think that's exactly what we
Okay.
need. Any other things on the pension? Okay, well, thank you.
Thank you for your patience.
Wow, she's really- Right, we're ready to talk about our post-employment benefits.
Stevens is here.
Is he going to talk about what we offer? Is that, or is that something you want to do ahead of time or?
I don't believe that Alex is gonna talk about what we offer, but we could, I guess we were gonna just talk through that maybe as you had questions.
Sorry,
Or-
I missed the question.
What, I was just asking what we offer we know what our pension is, but what do we offer employees for post-retirement
Oh, yeah,
benefits?
in fact,
You're gonna cover that? Okay. Okay, good, thank you.
Okay, do you wanna run it then, or do you want me to,
Oh, yeah,
whichever
I'll
works
go
for
ahead
you?
and do it.
Okay.
That way you don't have to hop back and forth in case we need to go to the valuation.
Yeah, so Alex is gonna do the HDMI.
Gonna go to all those screens, right?
Yep.
There we go. Okay. All right. Can everybody hear me? Good evening. Round two of the actuarial talk. This regarding the retiree healthcare plan or other post-employment benefit plan. My name's Alex Johnson. I'm an actuary with CBIZ. We've been the independent actuary for the retiree health plan the last 10 years or so, I believe. And Justin and Audrey invited me up here to answer some questions. I did get a list, the same list that Marnie had gone over. So I'll try not to repeat a lot of the same stuff, but expound on that as far as it applies to the OPEB plan. So to your question, Jill, the background of the retiree health plan, currently you offer medical and pharmacy benefits, both pre-Medicare and post-Medicare to your retirees. That is technically an open group and that you provide access to all of your current and future employees and current retirees to those plans. Those plans are fully insured, meaning that you're, paying a premium to the insurer. You're not self-insuring those claims as the city. The pre-Medicare benefits are through the Western Michigan Health Insurance Pool, and the Medicare eligible benefits are through a Medicare Advantage plan insured by Humana, and that comes with a drug plan attached to it as well. I mentioned it's open, but pretty much in all of the divisions, there's a grandfather date that varies by division. And anyone hired after that grandfather date has to contribute 100% of the group premium. So they're basically just given access to the plan in retirement. Those hired before the grandfather date and those in divisions 2, 5, and 20, which are most of the public safety groups, get a subsidized premium from the city, which as of the last valuation date was about 93 to 96% of the pre-65 premium, depending on what coverage level they elected. No ancillary benefits are offered. It's just medical and pharmacy. So there's no dental, vision, hearing, or life insurance that are provided. Anybody who opts out of the traditional group plan is eligible to receive an opt-out stipend that varies by division between about $1,600 and $1,800 a year to go purchase coverage elsewhere off of the city's group plan. And I have some counts down there. Those counts are similar. Oh, sorry, yeah.
For these public safety groups, is the spouse also covered? The
Spouses are
employee and the
covered.
spouse?
Yes.
If they have children, they're not covered, just the spouse?
Children can be covered up to age 26.
Okay. All right, so they could get full family coverage if they need, okay. Thank you.
So, Jill, it's very rare for someone to have family coverage though.
Yes.
I
Yeah.
understand.
But with the public safety groups, because there is a pretty young retirement age, it can happen, but yeah, like Justin said, it's pretty rare. Those counts there at the bottom, pretty similar to the pension plan, about 305 active participants, 214 retirees that are receiving benefits, 2 disabled retirees and 24 surviving spouses. So again, spouses are covered. If the retiree predeceases the spouse, they can continue coverage. And not included in the note at the bottom, there's 123 covered spouses of those 214 retirees. And so that's a difference between pension and OPEB, right? With a pension, if there's a survivor benefit, there's one benefit paid. When the retiree dies, the spouse gets it. With retiree health, if there's a spouse covered, it's double the benefit. So double the cost. Any questions on, benefits offered, any of the stuff that's on this first slide?
I have a question. I'm going to ask it now.
Sure, yeah, jump in.
Part of what we want to talk about is regional cooperation, and I've worked at 2 big municipalities in this area. For the Medicare Advantage plan, could we get it substantially cheaper if we had like a group of 5,000 retirees instead of a group of 200 retirees?
So
That worth something, is that worth investigating, I guess is my question.
there is negotiating power in group Medicare Advantage. But not as much as there used to be. So they changed the bid process with Medicare Advantage. Not sure how many years ago that was, but now the premium structures, the whole bid process is based on the individual market. So the group Medicare plans are spent in the individual market, which is unfortunate because those plans are generally less rich than the group plans. But there is power in that negotiating. And there's really only 2 main players in Michigan in the Medicare Advantage space, which is Humana and the Blues. So, do you know who your broker is?
Gallagher?
Gallagher. So that, that's something that, speaking with Gallagher and talking to them about that, because that's essentially what you've done with your pre-Medicare group, right? You're in that Western Michigan health insurance pool, which is just aggregating as many groups as you can. Not only does it help with the bargaining, but it also spreads risk. So the larger the pool, the more you're spreading risk, the less volatile your premiums are going to be year to year.
Yeah, and I think because the Humana comes up on a calendar basis, I do think that Gallagher goes out to bid to see if they can get better quotes. But I don't know if they went out to look at a pool, so I can ask that when at our next healthcare task force meeting. Yep, for sure.
And on my last slide, I'll talk about some of the trends in that space that we're seeing sort of across a lot of municipalities. So any other questions on this slide before I move on? I know there's some questions around normal costs and terminology, and I know Marnie had dug pretty deep into that inside. A lot of that is similar on the OPEB. And the main difference here is that, with retiree health, you're not accruing a benefit, right? There's no service time salary that's being accrued as you work investing. You're either going to work to retirement eligibility and get the benefit, or if you leave employment before you've reached that eligibility, you don't get anything. So, so when we think of these accrued liabilities, it's really an accrual of the city's liability based on the service that these employees have given the city, not so much an accrual of some benefit earned.
Sorry, I don't understand how you have any unfunded accrued liability at all on OPEB.
So there's a myriad different ways that we can calculate an accrued liability. And it's really a structure of one, accounting for it on your balance sheet, and two, how you fund it. So when we look at this pie chart here, you know, the base calculation that we're doing is this present value of all future benefits, right? We're taking all the people in your plan. We're projecting out all their future benefits based on our expectations of mortality and healthcare costs and everything. And we're discounting it back to today, assuming you earn 6.93% in your investments. That's the present value. And right now it's about 37 million. In theory, you put 37 million in your trust today, you let that ride, and if everything goes as expected, you're good to go for this group of people, assuming you don't hire anybody new. No municipality just has $37 million they can just throw into the bank real quick and fully fund this. So what we do is you accrue that. So when somebody is hired right on day one, they have no accrued liability because they've given the city no years of service. And every year of service, they accrue a normal cost. And so I like this, you know, pie chart. I like pie. So I like that sort of illustration. If you have to work 30 years to get your benefit, you're going to earn 30 slices of pie as you work. And so that accrued liability that goes on your balance sheet as the city is all those slices of pie that have been earned in exchange for years of service. That might have been a little long-winded, but does that
Well,
clear
yes,
it
but
up?
we're paying annual premiums at whatever the market says we need to pay them at.
Yes, but you're not going to pay for those active employees for potentially 30 years. And then once they retire, you might be paying them for 35 years. So we're calculating what's the expected payout for those employees for those health premiums over the next 50 to 80 years, and saying, this is the present value of all those costs. You should start funding it now to pay, just like a pension, you know. It's the same as, you know, we're projecting all those future payments that you're going to pay your pensioners, but you're going to start funding it now instead of waiting until they retire and paying their premiums. If that doesn't answer your question, I don't want to go too long-winded, but
I'll think about it. Thank you.
okay. So I guess with this, you know, again, with this pie analogy, again, all those slices of pie here, 37 million is that present value of benefits for this retiree health plan. Your market value of assets as of the 2024 valuation date was 24.2 million. That's what's in your OPEB trust. The remaining unfunded accrued liability, so all those past normal costs, all those past slices of pie that have been accrued that you haven't funded yet, is 11.2 million. So that's that unfunded accrued liability. And then the remainder here, these little green slices, 2.1 million, 0.2, that's the present value of future normal costs. So over the active employees' remaining working lifetime, we expect them to accrue the rest of that pie. And that breaks down to about 2.3 million from 2025 and beyond. Any questions on these terms or how that pie chart breaks down?
This was fully funded. Would it pay the premiums from it, or would you just pay out of there for the rest of the time? If it was fully funded?
If this was fully funded, if you had the 37 million of
Yes.
present value of benefits in there, in theory, assuming everything went as according to plan, all of your current active and current retired employees would have their premiums paid for the remainder of the life of the plan. This doesn't account for any future hires that you hire. But yes, in theory, as long as you're making, you know, the assumed investment return, people die and retire when we assume they're going to, then absolutely.
And it's an almost closed plan, right?
Yeah, it's virtually closed. Like I said, after those grandfather dates, and I wrote down real quick before, of the participants in the plan, 37% of them are in that group that have to pay 100% of the premium, and that's gonna be an ever-growing group because all your future hires are gonna be in that group. There's only about 18% that pay nothing. That's a grandfather group of firemen. And 45%, that middle group, which is currently the largest group, gets that mostly subsidized premium. Any other questions? So again, you have the money in the trust. You're currently invested in the MERS of Michigan total market portfolio, which mirrors your assets in the pension plan that Marnie talked about. And that expected long-term rate of return is 6.93%. We put down there the historical annualized investment returns. Her chart was a lot better there from 1976 onward that shows that big gain, but those annualized returns, obviously the last year was a little pretty bonkers with the 15.4% return. But over the last 5 years, earned just slightly higher than that expectation at 7.24%, and over the last 10 years, 8.22%. Those elevated investment returns have helped with your funded status for the OPEB plan. And obviously that 6.93% is a key in determining those liabilities and those actually determined contributions. And that last bullet there, similar to the pension plan, your contribution is made up of two prongs, right? Your normal cost contribution, that's the next year slice of pie for all your actives, and paying off all the old slices of pie that you've accrued but haven't yet funded in the trust. And the normal cost for this year is, I believe, it's about 1% of pay. It's like 243,000. So it's pretty small because, again, most of those active employees have to contribute nearly the entire premium. So the majority of your contribution is going again to that legacy liability, which is about just over $1 million. So the contribution for fiscal 2026 is the 1.27 million, which is about 4.5% of covered pay. Alternatively, if you didn't have that contribution strategy, and you were just paying benefits as you go and paying the required normal costs for employees hired after 2018, which is the law under PA 202, your contribution would be the 2.6 million, which is more than double, the actually determined contribution. So that just illustrates, the impact of that pre-funding of the liability and how that can lower your outlay for those contributions.
And those are the premiums that we're paying?
Yeah, so
We're paying $2.7 million in premiums?
yes, in fact, I'll have a chart in the evaluation report that shows, here's the projected premium payments for the next 30 years. So right now you're right at 2.5 million, and it's really gonna peak right there about 3 million. And it's pretty steady for the next several years as you're pretty getting into pretty retiree heavy population over the next 30 years.
I know it's not perfect, but if we came up with $11 million, we could save $3 million a year.
If you contributed the entire 11.2 million in unfunded liability, yes, your only contribution would be the normal cost, which is this 243,000, which is roughly 1% of pay for the group. So, and to break that down, I'm going to jumping around a little bit on these pages, but show here the calculation of that payment.
What page are you on?
This isn't on the slide deck. It's in the actuarial valuation report, which I think was attached to the agenda, but I don't know if I have a printout of it.
I think, yeah.
Oh, it's on page 7 of the actual evaluation report, if you have that. But I do have it pulled up on the screen here. I'll try and make it bigger.
And that valuation was provided to you in your first meeting, and it is on this agenda also.
But you can see here this breakdown of those two components. So that normal cost, again, if you were 100% funded, you fully funded this 11.2 million in unfunded accrued liability, you'd only have to contribute the normal cost of roughly 268,000 with interest. And so instead of, right now, your actuarially determined contribution is just calculated as the minimum required under Public Act 202. And the minimum says that you can amortize that unfunded liability over 24 years. That's the maximum amortization period. So that's how we get this $1 million amortization payment here over 24 years on top of the normal cost, which is the roughly 268,000.
Let me ask it one more way.
Yeah.
So if we contributed the 11 million, in theory, the premiums could be paid from the trust. And our only contribution would be this additional liability service cost. that
Yeah, the
comes out.
service cost. Yeah,
Okay.
here.
All right.
And that's sort of the ideal plan, right? And that's the whole terminology with the normal cost, right? It's what's called normal, is that you don't have an unfunded accrued liability. You're keeping up with what's accrued and you're only contributing your normal cost every year.
I'm just used to seeing the unfunded liability being a huge number. $11 million seems very reasonable to reach it.
Well, it was nice following the
Yeah.
pension group and coming in second. So
So what is the annual payment that if we didn't make that $11 million payment, what are we paying every year?
that's the 1.2 million,
1.276.
1.268, which is roughly 4.5% of pay. And that, again, the city doesn't have a formal funding policy as far as this plan goes. So this just meets the minimum required under Public Act 202. So there's a bunch of different ways you can amortize this unfunded. Like you said, you can come up with the 11 million all at once. We can amortize it over the maximum 24 years. If you wanted to target, hey, we want to be 100% funded by, 2035. Okay, then it's a 10-year amortization. We'll calculate that for you. So that strategy can go a bunch of different ways. But again, this is just the minimum under Public Act 202. I'm going to jump back to the slide deck, but is there any questions on how we got those numbers, what they mean? Oops. Okay. So, how we calculate that, what the accrued liability is. I know there's a question about sort of the history of funding progress with this plan. We looked at the last, 3 years. Currently, the plan is 68% funded, really right in line with your pension plan, which is 70% funded. The median funded ratio for Michigan OPEB plans in fiscal 2023 was 57.2. So you're above the 50th percentile. And notably from fiscal 2018 to fiscal 2025, the city increased its funded status from 31% to 68%, which is a substantial increase, and one we don't see often with OPEB plans. And also notable, over that same period, the city contributed an average of 103% of that actuarially determined contribution. So not only were you contributing the recommended contribution, you're contributing more than that, which coupled with, favorable investment returns, and other experience-related gains to the liability helped contribute to that increase in funded status. They talked about Public Act 202 thresholds on the pension side. Those thresholds are a little lower for the underfunded status on OPEB plans. 40% is the minimum threshold to be funded on OPEB plans. So you're well above that. And the other measure of underfunded status is the size of your actuarially determined contribution compared to your governmental fund revenues. And for fiscal year 26, that actuarially determined contribution, which was 1.2 million, is about 1.7% of your fiscal 25 governmental fund revenues. And the maximum that can be under Public Act 202 is 12%. So you're well below that. So no risk of being an underfunded status. And you can see there, the median is 1.2%, according to the state treasury. So just a little bit above the median. Any questions on this? I tried to hit kind of the highlights on this, but I'm happy to go into more detail. I heard the financial crisis get brought up from 2008. So I thought I'd talk about some of the trends in public sector OPEB plans since that 08 crash. The first and probably the most drastic thing that we saw OPEB plans do nationwide was either close participation to the plan or what we call a soft close, which is more or less what the city did, where you installed these grandfather dates and anyone hired after that grandfather date has to pay 100% of the premium. So they're just getting access to the group medical plan, which does provide an implied subsidy, right? You're still giving them access to a subsidized plan. And then more drastically, they would either just cut it off completely and there were no benefits if you were hired after a certain date. Some, including the city, installed defined contribution OPEB plans, which like healthcare savings plans, where you'd provide so much percent of pay into a savings plan that they can access those funds in retirement to purchase their own healthcare. Medicare Advantage plans, which we touched on at the beginning, the share of enrollment of Medicare eligible retirees in Medicare Advantage plans has increased from 22% to 54% since 2008. So more than half of your Medicare eligible retirees are in Advantage plans at this point, which shows you the popularity of that. And that has provided significant cost savings. And we've seen, particularly in Michigan, public sector OPEB plans take advantage of that. And there's been a huge shift to those plans in the last 10 years. Since 2017, we've seen a big increase in pre-funding of those liabilities. Again, we talked about how the cities increased their status from 31% to 68%. A lot of that was spurred by Public Act 202, incentivizing employers to get above that 40% threshold. Not to mention GASB 75 and 74 were introduced that year, which required cities to put their unfunded accrued liability on the balance sheet, which when you see those big numbers, you want to try and reduce that as much as possible. Access to pooled investment funds, such as the retiree health funding vehicle at MERS, Section 115 Advantage trusts, which are solely accessed by governments, is huge because those are way less administratively complicated than VEBAs and other types of trusts. So we can see, city obviously had a big improvement, but the median funded ratio for Michigan OPEBs increased from 49% to 57.2% just from 2019 to 2023. So a pretty big trend there in the pre-funding of liabilities. And lastly, I talked about some of those strategies as far as Medicare Advantage is concerned. A big thing that we've seen to take advantage of the efficiencies of those individual Medicare Advantage plans, since they drive the bid process, is to pair a health reimbursement arrangement with an individual Medicare Advantage plan rather than sponsoring a group. And so what that allows is the employer to control those cost increases from year to year. They're not reliant on, Humana or somebody else to give them whatever the premium increase is going to be. Could be 10%, you don't know. You can set those levels of cost share And it gives retirees the flexibility to choose the plans that they like. They might look at the group sponsored plan and say, it's either too rich for me or not enough benefits for me. I'd rather go get something different. And so we've seen this grow in popularity. We've helped many of our clients establish those plans in the past 3 to 4 years, particularly. The downside to those, of course, is that it can have a much higher administrative burden on municipalities. If you're going to do all this stuff in-house, now all of a sudden you have potentially hundreds of different medical plans that you have to get receipts from all your retirees and reimburse those retirees, deal with nominal accounts and tracking how much monies are still left in the accounts. Or you can outsource that to somebody to administer it, which of course increases your administrative costs. And then the downside of the retiree can sometimes be that those cost increases for healthcare coverage might be shifted to them if the employers aren't willing to increase their share into the HRA. So pros and cons, but still an option out there. Any questions on these highlighted trends? Okay, and the last slide here, just talking about headwinds, tailwinds for 2026 and really 2027 at this point. For the city's plan, historical funding has really allowed those actuarially determined contributions to come down quite a bit. The unfunded liability is up to, it's 68% funded. And that's going to allow that ratio between your actuarially determined contribution and your expected benefit payments to keep widening, which is great. And the city has yet to use the trust funds to pay benefits. You've been doing pay-go outside and throwing money into the trust, so you haven't even tapped into those funds yet, which again is also a plus. A new experience study is required by Public Act 202. I know the the MERS folks touched on that. There's been a recent pattern of gains to the plan, which means we should probably recalibrate some of those demographic assumptions. MERS just did their experience study in 2025. So it's something that we should probably look at for the OPEB plan going forward. As far as headwinds, healthcare trend continues to be a never-ending source of headwinds for medical plans. Projected medical trend for 2026 was 9.3%, and before rebates, drug trend is 11%, which, especially if you have specialty drugs, GLP-1s, or anything like that in your formulary, that can drive up a lot of the cost of your premium for these plans. And Medicare Advantage, they've revamped again the system, talking about the individual market driving a lot of this bid process, but also the CMS seems to be pulling funding out of the system. So they've restructured risk scores and star ratings and all of that. So the advance notice that came out in January says that 2027 CMS funding for Medicare Advantage is only increasing 0.9%. And when claims are going up about 5%, that puts a lot of cost burden on the plans themselves. So we might see upward pressure on premiums going into 2027. Not to mention lingering impacts of the Inflation Reduction Act on drug plans.
It's just so I have a clear understanding. You say the city has not yet used trust funds to pay retiree benefits. What's the downside of using those? Just so
There's really no downside. What you've been doing is paying benefits from general funds, and then the excess for your actually determined contribution is going into the trust, and you're letting those assets just earn interest. So it's more of a timing thing where you're getting the benefits of all those assets sitting in there and earning interest throughout the year.
concept of how much interest we're earning?
Last year it was 15.2% was your return on assets in the MERS trust. So,
What dollar value?
oh, you know what? I can pull that up. That was the percentage. The dollar value. Let's see, So for 2024, you brought in about 1.6 million in investment income to the trust.
So we could take the interest and leave the principal there and add to it as we wanted to.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, so the advantage is you would contribute that actually determined contribution to the trust, pay out your benefits from the trust. Sometimes that just becomes an administrative burden because you have to request those payments from MERS to reimburse you for your premiums. So logistically, you just have to sort that out, but otherwise, there's no downside as long as you're still between the two contributing the full actuarially determined contribution. Those are all my main talking points, but I'm happy to answer any questions or address any
I
concerns.
have a couple.
Yeah.
Did you use the 6.93 as your rate of return?
Yes.
That, is that what you would have used if you could have picked your own?
So,
I mean, it just seems low to me, that's why.
yeah, MERS uses, in their last experience study, they give a reasonable range between 6.5% and 7.5%. So 7 is about where we would land. 6.93 ties to all of their documents, so that's what we use. Coming from, we do work in the private sector too, and in the private sector, they'd probably tell you 6.9 is high, but we're comfortable with it, so I don't have any issues with that.
In your net benefit payments, does that include our contribution to the defined contribution? Or are those just the premiums?
Those are just the premiums. So the defined contribution plan does not generate an accrued liability. So we don't you don't need an actuary to value that.
I guess I have a question for Mark. For the ballot language, did we say it was going to go to pensions, or did we say it was going to our long-term liabilities?
It was pensions and, I don't have it in front of me, so I'm going from memory, but the intent was to pay down the unfunded liability in the pension system. The OPEB is not a required under our Constitution to be provided to our employees, except through the fact that, I think when we had our discussion with regard to that during 2017, but we had a moral obligation and that it was very good government to provide healthcare for our retirees, and that's why we continued the OPEB program. I had been chair of the House Healthcare Reform Committee, the Retiree Healthcare Reform Committee. So our problem here, our issue here is really minute compared to what we were looking at the state level, where we were talking about $40 billion of unfunded liability in our OPEB. So I think this is doable. It's very interesting information. And I think you highlighted it, which is that if there's a way for us to get to 100% funding, our annual obligation on this is peanuts. $250,000 a year. Our annual requirement on OPEB was different for each one of our groups because each one was differently populated, but the general group for, and this is 2007 numbers, I'm sure it's way over that now, but was about 5,500 for each of the retired state employees, 11,500 for an MSP retiree. The legislature, of course, was 100% funded, but we had eliminated all of the retiree, no pension, no health care after you're out of the legislature. So it was a whole different deal with regard to them. But I think this information is really useful, especially on the OPEB stuff. And that's something for you guys to dig into as to how we can manage that, because that would free up about $1 million for us on an annual basis.
Probably
to-
more than that.
Yeah, it might be more than that.
Yeah, if
So
we could
it's-
come up with 11 million and save 2 million.
It changes the whole outlook in terms of the finances as we go forward. So this
Yeah.
is really important stuff that we're.
Okay.
And-
If you're saying under the current balance language, you don't think we could take
I just looked at, I just
2 million of the extra and put it toward, it says.
the language
pension.
says supplemental payments for unfunded pension liabilities
All right.
specific.
Okay, thank you.
And again, to go back to what I said a little bit earlier, all of the information that you're seeing here and which has been presented before at the time was pointing us towards bankruptcy if we didn't take these actions. And we've avoided that obviously, and we're not headed for bankruptcy any longer. But that's why we concentrated on our biggest hit, because it would eat up our ability to actually operate as a city.
I have a question. Since your numbers are the exact same as the last MERS, do you use their same investments?
Yes, yeah.
And
so-
then, for that 693, like, are you guys following the specific market, like the Dow or the NASDAQ, or just the market in general?
So they have a specific set of investments that MERS invests in.
Okay.
So their total market portfolio, I want to say, you have it in here somewhere. It's 60% equities, 20% income, and then there's 20% private investments, which are, some of your riskier, private equities.
And then one question I probably should have asked her when she was here, but it said, like, when I'm looking at the sheet that she handed out, it said analyze 35-year rate of return for MERS for the defined benefit is 8.29%.
Mhm.
And then it says these performance numbers on this page are gross of fees. So do you know what the fee is that MERS charges for the assets under management?
Yes. The total fee, so I know that administrative fees are 0.21% of assets. And I want to say the overall fees are 0.37.
So those two added together?
It'd be the difference. So the difference would be for the investment management.
So 3.7 is a total.
3.7 is a total. I believe it's 3.7. In fact, if I have the
Need to remember that isn't just investment fees. That's for writing all the checks, meeting with all the employees. Those are all the fees for the services they provide us.
they put it in their quarterly statements. I'm trying to pull that up.
No, but like if you add that to the 693, that brings you to really a 7.3. And so that makes me feel a little more comfortable.
Yeah,
Because if the last 35 years, it's 8.29, and then they're forecasting the future at like, if you look at this, the numbers just go up every decade. So now we're gonna project that we're gonna go down when investing just gets more and more rampant. I mean, numbers don't lie, right? And so I think if you skew it low for them, it's beneficial. So we give MERS more money so they can manage it. Where skew a couple of these numbers and we'd be 100% funded doing what we're doing.
Can you talk a little bit about, because in the valuation, we have the PA 202, how that's different, because the state requires us to basically look at this based on their rate.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
It's another kind of component of this.
So under PA 202, you have to file Form 5572 to the state every year. And so we provide this compliance guide. And part of that is this section down here on uniform assumptions. So every year, the state treasury publishes their own set of actuarial assumptions that they want every municipality to use to calculate liabilities. It's not meant to be, an accurate measure of your liability. That's more, I think, to just compare apples to apples for every municipality. So we calculate, so as of 12/31/2024, your accrued liability on a funding basis was 35.3 million. You had 24.1 in as market value of assets. using the state's uniform assumptions, it was slightly lower. It was 35.2 million in accrued liability instead of 35.35.
So what was the rate that they wanted us to use or wanted?
I think it had to do with the wage increase rate, which it's a complicated, it's really funny because like, you know, retiree healthcare is not based on health, on your wages. But the way that we attribute those slices of pie over years of service is based on the growth of payroll. So your first year slice of pie is really small. And then as your payroll grows, so do your slices of pie. So by the last year of service, your pie is way bigger than your first year. So depending on the wage increase rate that we use and that the state prescribes for this calculation, it produces a different accrued liability. So that's why it was different. But it really has no material impact on your funding, but we do have to report it to the state.
I guess I was just trying to go back to like, if we picked a different rate that was way higher, the state would still require us to report because they want to see it on that. I mean, I guess.
Yes. Yeah, and they've fluctuated that. So for a while, the maximum discount rate that you could use was 7, then they dropped it to 6.8, and now it's back up to 7. So we've had to do some gymnastics there, but now that your rate is 6.93 and their maximum is 7, we can still use the 6.93 for their reporting.
Audrey, is there a reason the city chose not to use the trust funds to help pay?
No.
It's pretty common to do that. I think it's, again, more of an administrative logistics thing usually, where instead of putting your contribution in and taking the payments out, you just make your payments out of your general funds, and then any excess that you have to contribute, you just throw into the trust. Makes it easier logistically, I guess.
We made a recommendation that would be if the general fund balance exceeds budget. So let's say we budgeted to use 1 and we end up being adding 2, that half of that difference goes into OPEB. Is that something that would fly, or does that make sense? I mean, you don't have to answer right now. I'm just trying to find a way to come up with some extra money for this thing.
I don't really have an answer right now.
Yeah.
You know, it's worth taking a look at. But I think at this point in time, once we get a recommendation, we'll be able to dig in it more. And I could.
Yeah, okay, okay.
Well, I think what you would look at is, if you put it with merger OPEC, you'd be looking at a 6.93 rate of return versus what the city gets in the general fund, which they've told us is relatively small. But then you lose control of that money to utilize it within the city. So the city would have to be comfortable with saying, hey, this money's gonna, this is where it's going, but we're gonna get an extra 3 or 4% on our money. And then it could help reduce the future burden.
Right.
But if they're like, well, we've got this parking lot to pave and this to do and that to do, they might not want to forego that money.
I'm just trying to find
Yeah.
a way to find $11 million
Absolutely.
if it saves so
Well, how
more than $1 million a year. It
much
just
is
seems
in
like-
the trust fund?
24.2 million. Yeah, 24.2.
So what am I missing? If there's no downside to using the trust fund, why don't we use that toward the 11 million?
You gotta get the trust fund fully funded, we'll use another 11 million.
But he's saying we could use it now, right?
To pay benefits,
Oh, to
your
pay benefits.
accrued liability is 35 million, so you're 11.2 short of being fully funded on an accrued basis. Yeah, and there's, you know, some municipalities worry on retiree health about being overfunded, because I know you touched on it, Mark, about it's not like pension where you could take it away at any time. There's usually a moral obligation. Fortunately, in the public sector, more often than not, you're not just yanking benefits away. But what we've seen recently too is that, you know, we have a lot of plans in Michigan who have made changes to their plan or whatever the case may be, and they're significantly overfunded, like 200, 400% funded, small plans. And because the healthcare savings plan with MERS and your retiree health funding vehicle, which is your trust, is all in the same Section 115 trust, they've allowed them to use their OPEB assets to fund those healthcare savings plans for their active employees, since it's all a retiree health benefit. Something you probably want to talk to your MERS rep about, just to ensure that that's, but if you are worried about, well, let's put the 11 million in and then all of a sudden we change our benefit plan and now we're way overfunded, you may still be able to access those funds to tackle the healthcare savings plan. So
I can't imagine that we're gonna balance our budget on the back elderly retirees. So,
sure, but yeah.
at least not while I'm sitting here.
Any other questions, concerns? Absolutely. No, thank you. Appreciate it. Right.
When we had our departmental meetings, Ron talked about a couple revenue possibilities. And I sent him off to do some homework, and I think he's gonna come here with the homework to hand out.
Yeah, yeah. Absolutely free to call me, email me, whatever you.
If someone needs one, I was gonna say, if someone else needs one.
Oh, no. Good evening. Ron Lacoste, Director of Public Works. Just wanted to kind of go over some of the drain information that was requested. And this again is the maintenance bills that we get from the county. And what's in the first part of the drain packet is the actual assessments that went out for this fiscal year, because you guys wanted to know what kind of scale of bills people were getting, and I sorted them from smallest to largest. So you can see it starts off at $5.63 and goes all the way up to 3,429. And you can see as you get to the bigger bills, it's mostly commercial properties. Even Michigan State University, Bircham Hills, where you see a tailwind, you'll see that several times. That's the Gaslight Village development. There's still a lot of vacant lots up there, and an investment company owns those vacant lots. So that's what tailwind is. I can't tell you what all these are, but when you kind of dial up to the residential, and the tailwind ones would be at residential. If those lots sold, you're looking at about $136 is where the residential ones kind of top out. And then the larger ones get commercial, but even, you get to the last few before they get into the $1,000 range. So those are the assessments that went out this current fiscal year, totaling $55,000. If you flip to the next page, this is an analysis I did last year that if we had done this, what would be the assessments? And so it's kind of the same group of property owners, just depends on the maintenance that the county does on those drains. And if you flip to the back, it'll give you an idea of where those properties are. So both sets of data would affect the same properties. I just didn't have time to do the map for the current data. You can see that upper left corner is that Gaslight Village tailwind group, the quarters development. So that's where that group is. And then you can see kind of the residential section in the center and kind of scale of bills. Costco was in there, Bircham Hills was in there. This represents what would have been. That was an $87,000 total. So it kind of gives you the scale of where those assessments go with the residential in the middle and
this all represents different drains and how it would spread out. So that's kind of how the drain assessments would have laid out in fiscal year 25 and how they did lay out in 26. And obviously, I don't know what construction projects will come forward in future years.
What are the difference between the two lists?
The first list is what actually went on assessments this year.
Well, these are what you did assess.
Correct.
And the second list is what
I
you
prepared
paid.
last year saying, hey, if we do this, this is what would happen.
So the second list is what the city paid on behalf of the taxpayer.
Correct. And
Okay.
that's what prompted them to say, nope, let them be passed. So this is, and it's 55,000 this year, it was 87,000 last year. And that's just based on what maintenance the drain commissioner does on those drains. So next year's list will be different, or next year's amount will be different depending on maintenance.
I'm sorry, this is a really stupid question, but do we pay any millage to the Ingham County for drains? I don't remember. Do they have a drain authority or something?
There's an Ingham County drain, but I'm not sure if on your property tax bill for East Lansing, if anything goes to,
It'd be for Ingham County, I would think.
yeah, it might just be within the Ingham County. I don't know that it's separated like that. I can ask Andrea, or I can pull up that property tax bill.
See, why do you bill the first list and not the second list? Or why do these get charged to the people and the second one doesn't? What's the difference between them?
Historically, the city has paid these assessments.
Okay,
And that was last year, the 87,000
right,
was showing council, if we go this route and let the county assess the property owners, this is what would have, because they were interested to know how big a hit is this gonna be
Yeah.
on residential property owners.
Like,
So last year was the first year they said to let them pass.
yeah, I understand the second list. Explain to me the first list.
The first list is what we actually went, last year was theoretical, this year we actually let the county assess them. So this is how much they actually went on the winter tax bill.
This year being FY 2026.
correct, yeah, it went on the December 1st tax.
Everybody's winter tax bill got this amount added to it, the first.
Okay.
They expecting this, or was this?
No, the county sent letters, there's a letting them know that the city was no longer gonna intercept these. And then there was an administrative review where everybody got a chance to dispute the bills and things like that. It generated 2 phone calls to me. One person just wanted to know, what this was all about. And the other one had less than kind things to say about the city for passing them along. But out of the whole list, 2 calls.
So it went from an $87,000 evaluation in 1 year down to 55,000 evaluation in the next year?
Correct, and that's another reason I included the memo from last year. Is it explains that this is maintenance that the county does to their drains. So if in the $87,000 a year, they had more maintenance, they did. This year, they had less maintenance.
It's just their
Next-
cost.
Yes,
Yeah, so every year, these numbers to these people will
Change.
change based on what was spent. So
Correct.
they can't really be like, oh, it'll be $40. I mean, it's not gonna be. It'll
Correct,
just
but
change
this-
every year. It'll go up and down based
right,
on.
this
what
gives you 2
maintenance-
years worth of one is what it would have been, this is what it actually was.
City council's already made the decision to do this in 26.
Correct, so at this point forward, that's what we're gonna continue to do. The question still remains is the large construction projects, the big Montgomery Drain project done in Frandor area. We still intercepted those, and the question is, do we continue to do that?
Who would those have gone to if you hadn't intercepted?
Property owners impacted by that, so it goes by drainage district. So the properties that you see on this map are the properties that contribute flow.
And are those residential or commercial?
It depends on the project and which drain it impacts, so it's gonna be
For the
different for
Montgomery
everyone.
project specifically?
I don't know the answer to that because we didn't care, because we were intercepting them. We've never looked. I was kind of shocked when we did look that we're paying drain assessments for Costco and Michigan State and MDOT. So nobody ever looked at it because the city has always paid them. So this is when we started asking for the assessment roll. That's when we figured out. Maybe somebody knew at one time, but it was a surprise to me.
Is there any
Talk
new,
about the total cost on that Montgomery drain in particular, because that would be then transferred to adjacent property owners. What did we pay in on that?
I don't know those numbers off the top of my head. We were 1% of that. Most of it was Lansing and other jurisdictions, but I mean, there's significant costs, but it's something we can bring forward where we haven't before and say, this is what it would be. And there's other drain charges we can do that with. We would just have to do the assessments. We would pay them and have to actually assess them out ourselves. So there's more that can be done with this, but it's quite a bit of work to do that. And
Well, it's not like these people bought waterfront property. I mean, these are drains, so,
Correct.
and they weren't expecting to pay them up to this point.
up until this point, it was not on their tax bill, correct? Up until this year.
Are there any big drains planned within the city?
I can find out from, I mean, I can reach out
Because
to the
that's-
county and see what projects.
They're not
they
gonna
have
do
planned.
any for 8 years. There's no reason for us
Yeah,
to
that I
talk
don't-
about
I
it,
don't
but if
know,
there's
but
a new one. But I really think for future ones, we need to look at that. I mean, there's nothing we knew about the past. We've gotta,
Yeah,
and did
I
you
agree.
pay them all at once or are you paying the annual assessment on them?
We pay an assessment, they take
Paid
loans
one
out.
time,
Over time.
you're
like
paying over the time,
Yeah.
okay. So we should know what it is that
We
we're
have
paying.
debt service that we're paying on
Yeah.
those big projects.
Okay,
But it's something we can bring forward each time instead of just assuming the city's gonna pay them.
I remember a little piece of your budget being debt service. Is that what that is?
Several spots. I mean, there's drains, there's SRF projects,
Oh, is that a
sewer
mixed up
projects.
thing?
Yep, there's debt service still on the DPW building for the next couple of years. There's a few different things.
But these are specifically county drain.
Right, these are assessments that we're not doing. We just stopped intercepting them.
this is
These are
maintenance,
county,
not
these are
construction.
county drain assessments for, particular, these are maintenance.
We included everybody who's listed here. The additional amount of money available to the city would be about $22,000. Is that right?
The total,
87 minus the 55, because that's already
so
included.
the
in
55 is what we didn't intercept this year.
Right.
We let that get passed to the property owner.
It was
Typically, we
just-
would have paid it.
It was just
So the
cheaper this
87
year.
is additional money
So
or?
the 87 is what we, I'm not explaining this well, obviously. The 87,000 is what I brought to council last year to say, if we do this going forward, we paid this already for the residents. Had we not paid it, this is the total that would have been passed. To give council an idea of what the scale of the individual bills would be and what the number is. So we already paid the 87,000. That was just my attempt last year to tell council, if we stop paying these and we let them get passed, the total would have been 87,000. This year, as it turns out,
Instead of the 55.
Well, this year's was.
55 is what this year turned out to be. Correct. So the 87 was just showing the hypothetical, if we stop intercepting these, what people would pay. The 55 is what it turned out to actually be this year. Next year, it might be 90,000,
Yeah, maybe we
might be
could
40,000.
look back at a couple of the bills to see if we, over the past couple of years, to see if that maintenance portion, we could break that out, maybe not into the level of
Yeah,
detail.
but I could certainly look up past bills and see how much that maintenance piece typically fluctuates, but I suspect it's not all that great.
And these are what we would consider to be sort of an ordinary annual payment for each of the entities that are identified here. And if, for instance, on the drain work that was done on Michigan Avenue, which is, I know that we battled with the drain commissioner about what our share was going to be. And if that share was about $2.5 million, which is what I seem to recall, that would also be assessed for the adjoining.
It allowed it to be, yes, and us being one of them, there's typically a piece that we pay as well for city properties right away, all that kind of stuff. I don't know what that would have been had we let it get passed, because we didn't ask for the assessment roll because it wasn't a question, we were just paying it. So,
Okay, so this brought in 55,000 this year.
well, it's 55,000 we didn't pay. It didn't bring in
Correct.
revenue.
You
It
reduced your
was-
expenditures by
Correct.
55,000, okay. And then if we looked at these construction, in his example, let's say that 2 million of the 2.5 million was to taxpayers. That could have been spread to them over 10 years or whatever the amortization period was.
I don't know what that is
Yeah.
off the top of my head. So
I
the,
was just using
like
10
the
years
Montgomery
as an
drain
example of the
assessment, we did that
amortization
over-
period.
Oh, I think it's like 20 years,
Yes, that
yeah,
one is-
15, 20.
yeah, it's a long time.
Okay,
20-year spread, okay.
And we had one on the Proctor Drain, which is down by Melrose. That one I think is a 10-year, it's a smaller project,
Just came up, maybe?
maybe. But again, those are past projects. We didn't give the property owners a chance to object, so we're stuck with those. It's a question of whether we look at it differently moving forward. And it's not revenue, it's just not expense that we're gonna. that we're-
It's only Ingham County numbers.
Yes, because
What
it's
is
Ingham County drain assessment that got passed. So in this case, yes,
Clinton County.
we have not done that for Clinton County because very little of the property is there and the maintenance isn't something we've passed, or they haven't done any that we would pass. Most of the city, obviously, it's right around, just south of Coleman Road is the county line. So most of the city is in Ingham County. And they're much more progressive with their maintenance. And
But
again, there's a whole lot of work that would be done to look at this more. This is just, is it something worth putting more effort into?
Yeah, the most we'll say is we recommend you look at spreading if we chose to do it, spreading the assessments to the taxpayers instead of paying. If that example is $2 million over 20 years,
But he would have only benefited by 55,000 this year. In fact, you will.
We already did.
right?
So this was.
This is the main.
This was a lot of work for 55,000.
I'm not,
But
I'm not
well,
loving this,
is
yeah.
no work to us at all. We're not intercepting it at all.
Yeah,
They
but
give us the roll, we put it on the tax bill.
you gotta put it on the tax, that's the work, putting it on the tax
Correct.
bill.
Might not be your work.
Right.
but-
Correct, I didn't mean to.
Yeah,
All right.
But I think that $2 million could be saved in the future because another drain project is gonna come up,
2 million over how many years?
a 20-year period.
Yeah, the drain commissioner decides how long to bond for and all that kind of
Right,
stuff. So
I'm-
that's not really in our control.
I just would like to find bigger apples falling from the tree, I guess.
no, I would too, but, and I'm not sure I'm thrilled with pushing it onto the taxpayers, but that's why we could make a, just a general recommendation that this looks like an area where there could be additional savings. You may want to look at it, but I don't know if we're there yet, but
Yeah, I mean, in fiscal year 25 on that memo, $441,000 was budgeted to pay Ingham and Clinton drain assessments. Now, how much of that we could technically stop intercepting or assess out, I don't know, but it's 441,000 we spent in 25 was budgeted to pay drain assessments.
Well,
minus the 87.
No, that was just the total was 441,000.
I know, but minus the 87 would be for construction then? Does that make sense?
There's other drain assessments. There's lots of different types. So I'd have to do a whole lot more research. That's the question is does this group think it's worth the work to go through that?
at this point.
I don't think it's worth the work for this committee, but it may be worth the work for the city to
Right.
figure out what they want to do moving
Right.
forwards.
So if it's a recommendation moving forward, then we would go through all that effort, but. Any other questions on drains, I guess? So switching to streetlights, I had a staff person put this together and make a lot of phone calls, so it's a little less polished. So we budgeted 1.45 million in fiscal year 26 for streetlights. And this is split between Consumers Energy and the board. Most of it is the Board of Water and Light. And of that, 118,000 is paid by the DDA for downtown streetlights. So about 1.3 million budgeted to come out of the general fund for streetlights. And this is just kind of a layout of what information we could get on municipalities that special assess streetlights. So from looking at City of Southfield, they do it on the neighborhood level. They look at each neighborhood and assess street lighting based on neighborhood. They do have a section of streetlights that are still city-owned, but they're pushing those to DTE in the future. Similarly, the city used to own some streetlights, but now the Board of Water and Light owns all the streetlights. And just looking at the parcels and all that, a residential charge is around 105 annually. apparently between 35 cents and 105 annually. I don't know how that all lays out, with an average of $16 for residential and, you know, 210 to 9,200 annually for commercial, I'm guessing for large commercial. Flint takes a different approach and just takes their total bill and divides it up amongst all the parcels in the city, not by neighborhood. And it ends up being about a $72 per parcel assessment. Clinton Township, we weren't able to get a phone call from them, but just from the website, they do it by district as well. And looks like their DDA pays about 15,000. Delhi Township, actually Bob Shireman, our temporary engineer, used to be an engineer. We brought him back out of retirement. He actually did the assessment in Delhi when he was there. Set that up, and it was based on districts. Again, it's by neighborhood district, and they actually split 50-50 on major streets because they look at it as major streets. It's more the traveling public passing through also benefits from those. It's not just the people on those streets. So commercial average was about 912 a year. Residential average is about 174 per year in the Board of Water and Light District, and 55 annually for residential in Consumers Energy. And then again, Meridian Township does the same thing. They only do this for new neighborhoods going, as neighborhoods are built, they assess the streetlights. Average per parcel is about $60 a year. If we do the easy method, because it would be a ton of work to do it by neighborhood, but just doing the Flint model, because it's just assessing per parcel. There's 8,300 parcels. It would end up being about $159 per parcel to take our 1.3 million and dividing it up.
So if I don't want to participate in that fee, I would just take the street light out in front of my house, and then I wouldn't have.
It would have to be, I'm assuming, but depending on how they did it, it would be the whole neighborhood, or conversely looking at it as a millage, it'd be about 0.7 mils or $70 per 100,000.
Mr. Bellman put this on his list yesterday or last year, but did not recommend it, right?
Originally, he did not recommend it.
It's because it was too close to the franchise fee.
I think he was afraid it would get challenged if there weren't a way to opt out. So that would all have to be investigated through the signature. That's why we put the alternative would be a millage. Not all great ideas, but it's, what's that?
Is the total in here somewhere on this sheet that we would expect to have as extra revenue? If we were to go for this.
When right now we pay 1.3 million, so it'd be a substantial.
City though, right?
What's that?
Some of that is city, or is this strictly residential?
No, the 1.3 is what's left after the DDA pays. So how much of that we would, if we assessed out all the neighborhoods, sharing with major streets, I mean, it all depends on what route we would take to do that, but it would be a substantial number if we decided to assess out streetlights.
I'd also just like to mention that I did my master's capstone on special assessment utilization in Michigan. So I have like a policy brief I did on that, which I think is like very relevant. I could like provide to the committee as well. So I took data from like the entire state and local government. So if you want to look at that at all, I can pass that along.
And it's only for streets. There, like, no parks are in this number or anything else that we're not thinking of.
Like the Hannah Community Center, they have their own bills that they pay outside of this. This is what comes from this is what we budget in the general fund
For only
for
street.
streetlights.
Okay.
But none of these ideas are great, but that's what we're done to.
But here's a big number at
Yeah,
least.
well,
At least
see
we've come up with.
what we're interested in looking at, so.
Right.
Any questions on streetlights?
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, attached is the report. It was also attached to our last meeting that was done in 2016 regarding the net cost to the city of MSU. So the question is, do we want to have that updated? Have we found a vendor that could do that? Have you? Okay,
Not looking into it.
we could talk to the person who did it last time. Is that something that we'd like to do?
Gotta be done every now and again. I mean, I looked at the summary, executive summary, and this was done back in 2016. And they suggested the fire department costs were 1.68 million. Police department 1.62, city jail, which I hadn't even thought about, 376. A little bit of DPW costs. They estimated the net annual cost of MSU to the city budget at about 3.75 million in total. They thought, at that time, they thought PA 289 fire protection grants were underfunded by about 13.2 million since 2004, or about 1.6 million annually. Statutory revenue sharing payments were definitely underfunded. The state budget tends to help balance on the statutory revenue sharing payments. And then we had unfunded pension and OPEB liability, which was, I thought was kind of interesting that he added that here, because he said unfunded pension liability attributable to MSU would be about 12.5 million. Now, I've just skimmed this. I mean, I just looked at the executive piece of this, how I happen to know Mitch. But they were substantial numbers. So, yeah, I'd like to see it updated.
And now remember, since then, there are non-residents are paying a lot of income
The
tax.
residents pay income tax, but
Correct.
not the institution.
No, I understand. But at least there's offsetting revenue. There wasn't offsetting revenue in that report.
I don't know if Mitch would have decided to put the income tax paid by MSU folks against us or not.
I
It
think-
would have been interesting to hear his logic.
I think we have to, because that was part of the negotiation of whether we would pursue, correct? Yes.
Yeah, I think
guess I didn't
maybe a little history here that, there was recommendation by the financial health team. We entered into negotiations with the university and ultimately we agreed that we would not go forward with an income tax in exchange for an annual payment in the broad strokes of what you just talked about. But unfortunately, the president couldn't deliver. And the board of trustees rejected the deal. And so we went ahead and put on the ballot the income tax because that was our way of dealing with these particular additional costs and utilizing the employment of people on the Michigan State campus to provide some revenue anyway to the city at that time. So that's how that played out. But those are significant costs. Over the period of time that the university began to pay into the city's treasury an annual amount of money when Hannah was president. And that continued until Peter became president. And then we saw a significant reduction. So those numbers that you talked about were numbers that became more of a problem for us as time went on. And I can't remember the exact numbers at this point in time, but I think even by the time that Peter became president, we were getting about 1.5 million or something from the university on an annual basis, specifically with the idea to pay for fire service on campus. And then that reduced, and I don't know how much we're getting now, but I think it's still targeted towards fire service. I don't know what they're saying or how it comes in, but my memory is that they still sort of characterize it themselves as paying for the fire service on campus that way. And I think it's in the $500,000 range or something, or 350,000 or something. If you know.
I think it's 326.
So when the income tax expires, as a city council member, do you think that is something the city council would pursue with MSU again to negotiate? Hey, you can either pay us a flat rate based on this that we could get updated. And if you don't like that, then we'll just go back to our voting base and see if we can't renew this agreement. We already, because I don't know if the people that I've talked to that don't live in East Lansing but work in East Lansing, they're not super fond of the income tax. And so I don't know if MSU is like paying attention to that or if they even care, but if that's something they've heard a lot about from their employees and they're like, well, maybe we should be paying this on their behalf. Like, so I don't know, like where you guys stand as a group. Is that something? Because if you're willing to go to MSU first before you go to the taxpayers, then I think this is something we should definitely have redone. But if you're kind of content with like, well, let's just renew this thing in 2031, then, maybe this doesn't have to be done.
Well, I think that the revenue we receive from the income tax, in my opinion, anyway, exceeds what the university had actually offered to provide us. And in retrospect, looking back on it, where we were just trying to make sure that we met this threshold that's identified in there, that we couldn't anticipate what the future held. And so I would say that we still need, personally, I'd say that we still need to have the revenue from the income tax going forward. And, at some point in time, council, probably not a council I'm gonna any longer be on, that they'll have to have that discussion about whether they're going back to the public to extend the income tax, maybe change the charter language to provide more flexibility with regard to that money. And, I think that the university should see that as an okay thing, frankly. Our justification for the income tax, I think, was a valid justification, and also that a recognition that while people are within our community, they are receiving the services that money is actually going to pay for. Maybe they don't come to Hannah every day and take advantage of some of the recreational opportunities here, but they certainly take advantage of the public safety that's available on this side of Grand River, and they take advantage of all of our employees providing services on a daily basis if they're in our community. So, I think that's a very good question that you asked. And I think it's something that you guys need to think about and talk about. I would say, from a personal standpoint, that the income tax has been successful. Probably not as successful as I thought it was going to be, because I thought by now we'd be really headed towards 100% funding, but we can't anticipate what happens in the economy. So we've done pretty good, really, when you think about it. And even though nobody likes paying taxes, let's face it, and especially somebody who may live in Meridian Township and working for the university, but this isn't a lot of tax money from somebody at the 0.5% of your salary is just not a lot of dough. So,
Well, we certainly paid Lansing when we worked in Lansing,
Exactly.
we lived in East Lansing.
and
And I felt the same way. If I'm working down in the Roosevelt Building in Lansing and I need a fireman or I need a policeman, I'm not gonna be calling East Lansing. I'm gonna be using the Lansing services.
The city entered into the negotiations with MSU the last time. Was this like with the 2019 income tax, or like one of the earlier attempts at it?
no, it was
Oh.
the result of the recommendation that was made in 2017 by the financial health team. And
Okay.
the president, there's a series of, anybody can FOIA the letters that went back and forth, but there was I feel like I always got along with the president, and we had our little issues involving things like the income tax. So those when you read those letters, they sound a little tougher than they really are. But it was a good negotiation, but the Board of Trustees was not interested.
I would like to get this income tax issue addressed as soon as possible, just get it off the table, but I'd like Mr. Klein to be here when we do it, so
I
once
tell you-
he's back, I think, we need to have a meeting just talking about the.
I will tell you, what I'm kind of favoring is that we hold off and do all our. I mean, I'd like people to bring forward what they're getting out of these meetings and with their ideas of potential recommendations and discuss them all in one, and because some may feed off of each other. And so, you know, I suspect, I know where we're gonna be on the income tax, but that is one recommendation. That there are probably gonna be several, I would hope, after we spend all this time. And I'd rather do them all in a group than start one at a time.
I just feel like we spend half our meeting talking about the income
Well, I
tax.
think we
That's
all
why I'm
understand it now.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, we're not as
No, I understand.
advanced as you are on the local revenue
Right.
issue.
Okay, but again, I'd like him there because he's gonna know.
Absolutely. In fact, we kind of put off a discussion.
Yeah, Mr. Klein, not Mark, but we put this discussion off for Mark.
Talking about courts too.
Oh, yeah,
Yeah, I bring that up.
sure, of course.
We were talking about, I had asked Mr. Bellman, coming from Saginaw, what did he see that we did differently than what he was familiar with in Saginaw? And one of the first things he brought up was the court system was handled by, I think, the Saginaw County rather than the city. And he said that was something that was really different for him. And then Jill brought up, there's a long history about East Lansing being responsible for the expenses of the 54B court. And we gotta wait for you to hear the history of it.
Well, I'm old, but I don't think I'm that old, but so I don't know if I can tell you the whole history of it. But I'll just say that it was not an issue, when I was first elected to council. I think it became somewhat of an issue towards the end of the nineties and into the early 2000s. Because we had a significant reduction in the number of cases within our court. When I was first elected, we had 2 district court judges and a magistrate. And at some point, the judges indicated, we don't need the magistrate anymore. That became a lawsuit. So there was a reduction in work there. We've struggled with that ever since. I think the judges are busy. But we have, even when I was in the legislature, we were looking at the reduction of the number of district judges within the state because of a lack of cases that were being processed in the district courts, and we were suffering the same type of issue here. So we have a court, and I wish I could remember right off the top of my head what the class actually designation means, but we have a court of a certain class which is supported by a city. If we were to change, or it was able to change to the other class, it would be supported by the county. But we also lose then some, I guess, control in a number of ways. We went through, I want to say, I think it was 2015, 2016. Is Eric still here? No, he left. The 2015, 2016, we engaged in a very large analysis of the district court and the possibility of consolidation of all the county courts, all the county district courts into basically a single district court with different locations. Our problem is that the majority of our clientele, if you will, really are able to easily get to this court by walking across Grand River and attending court. And we didn't want to lose that. And the judges didn't want to lose that. There was some opposition from the judges to any kind of consolidation because you lose, authority. And there might be a different chief judge elected within the group. At the end of all that negotiation, we were at a point of looking at only a consolidation with Meridian Township, so that we had, that's a majority of cases here, and that would prevent them from having to go down to Mason for their court. And I think that more recently, we probably have discussed that, but nobody's really, working on that right now. Future consolidation, that would save us a lot of money with regard to the court. It wouldn't necessarily require the movement of the court, so we'd still have that advantage. We probably would look, if we were gonna move the court, we'd probably look at some place that's a little closer to Meridian Township, but still close to campus, that type of thing. But none of that is going on right now. There's no discussions with regard to it. And there's been no analysis of what that would really save us during this
Well,
time.
we've got what, about 1.3 or 1.6 million that we're paying for the court? Does it seem
I
like? the
think
right
it was
ballpark?
bigger than that, but, yeah.
Wasn't there another study in like 2019 that ran out of time or something?
That was the negotiations we were involved in at the time. We were actually meeting at the Capitol trying to put this all together.
Okay, so it
And
went from 15 to 19?
yeah, it was during that time frame. I thought, and by 2019, we had changed the focus on it. But in the 2019 when the 2019 election was over, it kind of died. I mean, we, almost immediately we realized we're in COVID. And so a number of things sort of got put aside because it was no longer possible to sit next to anybody and actually talk about things. So
The 26 budget request was a use of fund balance of 2.1 million, or net impact to the general fund of 2.1 million.
And I'll just add one thing. There was a point in time over the years where we felt that the court was not taking advantage of the laws that we had established in terms of the fees or penalties that could be assessed. And there's, any money they get, it gets distributed according to state statute in different ways. Everybody thinks it all comes here, but it doesn't, And the court responded and began to look at that more seriously. But we have a due process issue with regard to penalties that are assessed too. And even though we could say that every violation you can get $550, there are plenty of circumstances where that is just not a due process fine. And so we tend to find much lower than that. So that's an issue to look at too.
So are most of the folks served by our court, as you say, across Grand River and within the district? Are there any that come in from other areas?
Yes, but the vast majority of litigants in our court are East Lansing within the district. Because district courts have some statutory jurisdiction over some things, it's a little known fact, but the Attorney General generally gets any search warrants, things like that, right here in East Lansing. Because if you go to Lansing, you got to wait 4 hours to get in front of the judge, but you can come here, and because we have a lighter caseload, it's quicker to get it. So.
Do you have some feel for what the savings would be if we had done the merger? Like 10% or? If you don't, that's fine, but.
Well, I know that we looked at it, if it was merged, then it becomes a county court. And yeah, and then so I can't remember what the judges make now, 175 or something like that.
We don't pay the judges. I mean, we do pay the judges, but it's not
State.
that amount. The state kind of reimburses them for the difference. I think it's like
Yes.
75,000 each, maybe.
So that wouldn't be big money for us, but the general fund contribution then would come actually from the county, so.
The county would pick up the whole 2.1 that we're paying right now.
As I understand this different class that they would be in, but I think it's worth having something in front of you to take a look at. I don't think consolidation is in the cards. I can't imagine why the judges would want to do that at this point in time. Generally speaking, when I was chair of the Judiciary Committee, when we did reduce the number of judges within a district, we did it through attrition. In other words, we wouldn't refill that position because they couldn't run again, you know, and then that position would become empty. We've got some pretty young judges here, so I don't think that's, you know, that's in our future anyway, so.
But if we had a list of regional cooperation things that should be looked at, we could just list that there as one of the items somebody should look at.
I have to say, in talking to the few people I've talked to, we seem to have a reputation for not playing well with others. I don't know where that comes from. It may be the whole court issue.
I don't know. We have mutual aid agreements with every community that is around us, and I think they respect our police and fire, and we help when we can, and they don't have any hesitation to come in and help us. We probably have at least 120 different cooperative agreements with the university and how we do things. So I don't know where that comes from. You know, they also say we don't have any parking, but we have plenty. So I think it's just, you know, sometimes it's not based in fact. Let me put it that way.
All right, well, back to the MSU report. Do we want to have it updated? We have a small budget that was given when the committee was established to pay for consulting fees if this is what we choose to do.
Can we put that decision off a little bit and see if we need that 5,000 for something else?
Well, my thought is this may take a couple months to do. That's my biggest issue. And two, if we needed a little bit more money, I'm sure we could get it. So it's not like we spend the 5,000, we're out. I'm sure if we asked for another 5, we could get it. But my biggest concern of waiting for this, the end of April or something, we may not get it in time. So we either do it now, or, I mean, we can go to the next meeting. Well, that's still 2 weeks from now. You know, this is just gonna take somebody a long time to get this report together.
Last one that was done was 2016.
Correct. Right, and if we could get the same guy, the same person who did it last time, if he still does this stuff.
It would be, I'm less committed to doing this, having heard your background, but it would be interesting to see whether whatever the new person comes up with equates to what we're getting out of the income tax.
We could at least ask the finance department to bring back a proposal on what it would cost if we want to move forward on it. Then we can commit to doing it.
I'd be in favor of getting the proposal at least.
Yep, let's get a proposal to do it, how long it'll take, and how much. All right, second? All in favor? Back to your comment about making the recommendations all the time. I guess I'm kind of flipping out about having to give a report on April 15th. That's why I'd like to get some
I
things.
feel like all we need to do is say we've met, we've discussed this, we've discussed that from the minutes,
Okay.
and we're moving forward.
I guess that's my
Are
thought. If
you
we can,
expecting any more in April than that? What do you want?
That
Mark?
wasn't my idea. So all I can say is that. So
You'd be happy with that, then.
yeah, that'd be fine.
Just let them know we're moving forward.
that's where I'm coming from. If we could get a couple things that I can at least talk about in the report.
Well,
But if
and
we
I
just want to stay-
hesitate to do that because then that becomes the focus until the next time we report. And there may be other things that are equally
Yeah.
important, but then they're not getting the attention.
I just hear tick, 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 tick in my
Yeah, I-
head, so. There's a few other items here that were follow-ups. I think they're just handouts to look at.
What was the impeding traffic memo? I've forgotten even. Guess it wasn't.
From my understanding was when an impeding traffic is written, that fine comes directly back to the city
Oh, that was.
versus getting split. Correct.
That's right.
And so what they like to do is plead traffic violations down to an impeding traffic because it doesn't give you points on your driving record, but then the money comes to the city. So it's kind of a win-win for both parties. And I think they were saying we could do more of that
Oh,
to generate more revenue. Is how I interpreted the discussion a few weeks ago.
Right, and now where do we go to at the next meeting? What's people's future agenda?
well, we have debt service, I'd still like to know a little bit about. And the reason I'm saying is because I'm thinking debt service is a potential way to help balance the annual budget.
Gave us a debt service schedule, right? At one point,
Yes, I plan on updating it because our newest bills just came out, so I have updated information for the issuances that just came out this fall, so that was not included. But again, those were sewer funded, so that may not even impact the general fund for your purposes.
I guess a debt service way to pay for that instead of a general fund.
and also the debt capacity schedule from the financial, just because I don't want to have to hunt through there to find that. Okay, so debt service.
And Audrey, maybe you could give us a 5-minute spiel about when I see indirect costs in your budget, indirect cost allocations, let's pick the city manager's budget just as an example. It goes in there as a reduction on expenditures. But the cost of those indirect cost allocations are coming out of some other department's budget. And I don't understand where the positive piece, if you will, where does it show? If I don't know, pick a budget. If I'm working the Department of Public Works and I'm paying some money to help cover the indirect cost allocation in the city manager budget, where am I gonna see the corresponding difference in the DPW budget? Or does it run through that internal service fund of some type?
So, I was hoping I could just pop up a couple of the budget areas. So I forgot that it's buried in operating costs. I was hoping that.
Is that where it would show up?
It would show up under
That's
operating
fine.
costs. Yeah, so, and it's across the city. So, I mean, because finance provides services to the library,
Sure.
they have an expenditure item for indirect costs.
Okay, it's
They're-
buried in operating costs.
Yep.
All right, that's fine. And then should we know something about those internal service, you got 3 of them, if I remember right.
Mhm.
We know something about those internal service funds and how they may or may not hit general fund?
I can run through them at very high level, just so that
Well, if
maybe
they
that,
don't
maybe
hit
that
general
frames
fund
it.
At all, that's.
No, they
they
do because, so for instance, the computer services fund. They look at all of their expenses for all of the equipment for the year, or the annual maintenance, software agreements, all that. And then they identify all the pieces of equipment that any department has and allocates a portion of the cost of that equipment. So finance has X number of computers and printers, so we get a portion of that charge. So everyone in the general fund gets a little bit of that cost.
And
So-
does that show up in operating costs as well?
Yes, that would, yeah, that would show up under operating costs. And similarly with the pool fund, because it has kind of 3 components, GIS, the pool and the garage. Garage, if you are police and fire and you have vehicles, yes, that would hit the another operating cost within the general fund. GIS, yeah, like assessing has GIS allocated charges. And then pool, that's our group of employees, our public service employees that might work on sewer mains, might work on water, might work on solid waste, but they also might work on downtown maintenance or parks maintenance, which are in the general fund. So a small, that I would say that piece of the pool fund is much smaller for the general fund, but yep, that would, and those would show up under personnel. GIS and garage would show up under operating.
But they're built into the general fund pieces.
The
Yeah.
budget, yeah, and then our insurance fund also has kind of a couple components. It has health insurance and fringes. Sorry, I'm just gotta collect my thoughts. So health insurance and fringes, workers' compensation, and general liability. So all the costs are paid out of that fund, but then are charged out to similarly to users of those things
Those are for active employees.
and retirees. So general liability is a little bit easier to talk about because it is the cost of our insurance premiums for our facilities and all that. And employment liability, those kind of crime, those kind of liability costs, and those are allocated by various metrics to all the different funds that are users. Workers' comp is based on a different rate for a different type of employee. Workers' comp is higher for a firefighter than a desk person. Again, based on who's in the general fund, so it's allocated to the general fund.
Oh, I'm sorry, so when we were talking about OPEB costs.
Yep.
Literally, which budget is it paid out of?
So you pay the bill out of the insurance fund, but there's revenue coming from the general fund or the Parks and Recreation Fund to give them cash to pay the bill. But
That flowing through the operating, or I'm sorry, the personnel cost of each budget, or is that?
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, so that applies to active employees and retirees. So active employees that are housed in finance, fire, police, those are all obviously in the general fund. But then retirees of those divisions, we know the cost or the budget that's in the insurance fund. And then we charge those individual departments to make sure that we can collect enough revenue to pay those bills out of the insurance fund. So it's kind of like a pass through. But yes, all of those costs are allocated to the user or originating department. So general fund is absolutely impacted by insurance premiums going up, OPEB costs going up.
Oh, that's all I needed. I
Okay.
just wondered where the other end of it was showing up.
Yeah. So I'm hearing for, next meeting just at service. That's all okay. Did you want to talk? Well, I guess. No, I was gonna say you had mentioned a dedicated meeting about income tax, or do you want to? Okay. Okay. And I think at the last meeting you had talked about active health insurance. Is that something that you want me to reach out to Gallagher so that you can hear a little bit more about the pool that we're a participant in, or what the process is that they bid out our health insurance?
So the way I'm thinking is, first I need to decide there's a problem. And that's kind of what we've been gathering all this info on. Is there a problem? The second part is, how big is the problem? And then to me, you go to the taxpayer's very last thing, that you try to solve the problem as much as you can through things like Jill's been creative a couple times here. You know, can you take care of the problem that way? And then if you decide, no, you can't, well, then you gotta go to the taxpayers. Because we're already a highly taxed area. And the more we put on property owners, you know, we're already missing middle income housing. We aren't very diverse as we get older in this community. Well, the more we ask property owners to pick up the tab, the housing becomes even less affordable to maintain. So that's kind of my, just so you know where my mindset's coming. So I'm looking, you know, like I say, Jill's come up with a couple of brilliant ideas, at least to look at. So I'm looking for any suggestions you have, but then to me, once you decide what the problem is and how you might want to solve it, how you solve it, in part, you need to be looking out in the future to see, are there any big things out there that we ought to be aware of? That's why I looked at the salary study. I went out there and looked and said, well, you know, do we have big balloon where we're really out of whack with the rest of the employers in the area or people like us? And I think the answer is no. you'll do whatever negotiations you do, but there's no big issue out there. You know, we see that eventually in 2038, our MERS payment's gonna drop. Well, that's a good thing, good. You know, so it'd be interesting to have you, maybe Mr. Bellman, give us a sense of what do you see it? There's always, you know, we're gonna go to war, blah, 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 blah. There's always those kind of at risk, but if you guys know of some big bubble risks out there or pros that are coming our way, I think it would help give us a sense of how much do we have to solve.
I mean, did you happen to listen to the forecast from Tuesday?
I glanced through it, yeah.
I mean, I think that's sort of the number is that's an operational deficit. And that's not taking into account some of the bigger that has nothing in there for like major capital improvements, or even if we debt fund it. So
Maybe that's something we ought to put on next week's or next meeting's agenda, is having you give your presentation
That's,
on the
Yeah, let's do
5-year
that.
forecast, because I do have some questions, and frankly, you were way beyond my bedtime on Tuesday.
it's still available, so you can rewatch it if you want to hear it.
I just would
Yeah.
like to hear you, and then I
then we
can
can ask questions.
ask my questions, be done, and
I was gonna say at the last meeting, I believe Mr. Bellman said like him and his staff are looking at recommendations to make to the council as well. So I was curious, like, how many of those are actually gonna overlap with like any recommendations we make like as a committee, or like how like that would interact at all?
Well, they're just starting their process, so
Oh,
they don't
okay.
know what those are gonna be yet, right? Any budget balancing things you're doing this year, you don't know yet.
Not yet, no, yeah, we're
Right.
still developing all of those conversations and lists and potential cuts.
I just want to say, because of something that you commented on, I can't remember the exact year, probably 2005, 2006, we were confronted with a huge increase in healthcare costs. And as I recall, at that point in time, we put together a group of employees to discuss how we can take care of this problem. And a number of changes took place as a result of that. So we don't always just try to throw money at the issue. We talk to our employees, and I think in that case, it was successful, and they may have met more than just at that point in time to deal with healthcare issues, because I thought that committee kept on.
Oh, yeah, we continue, we still have healthcare task force meetings. That's how all of our individual unions don't bargain for health insurance. They all have representatives on the healthcare task force. And so they, as a group, agree to accept, you know, the bid that came from X, Y, or Z. So we use a broker to provide those, you know, things. And then they agree as a group to go with that recommendation.
Yeah, and I
Which
think a
recommendation?
presentation to this group about, if not just that, if there are other ways that we've been doing it, to let them know, let everybody know that we don't just ignore this. You know, the employees have been very helpful in us dealing with some of the costs that we've seen go up exponentially over the years, so.
But that was my thing, when you asked about the broker, I think it's just helpful for him to say, we're doing all we can to cut your to find your best deal.
Sure.
So I think it would be helpful if he came. I guess this task force, no matter what bargaining group you're in, everybody has the same plan.
Correct.
Okay, good.
Yeah, I think it might also be helpful with that, to have them discuss the hard cap, because that is also, that was sort of the goal of the group to keep us at the hard cap, but that's sort of at a decision point right now. So I think that would be a good conversation to have with this group too. So I will reach out and see what their availability is. Would you want that for the next meeting if they were available?
Can.
Okay, I will.
Because it's light. Do you have a suggestion, Mark? Okay, so we're gonna do debt service. We're gonna have you review your new 5-year forecast. And if you have any recommendations that come up in the next 2 weeks, what you guys are thinking of doing. And the health insurance. Anybody, anything else you're direly wanting to know?
Well, the only thing I've ever wondered about is when I read articles about all these apartment buildings that have gone up in the last 3-4 years, and they're pretty big units. I don't quite understand, because there's like, oh, their property taxes are deferred for 20 years or something like that, and I don't know, does that mean like they don't pay anything for 20 years, or like? So I would like to be educated a little bit more on that, because like she said, we don't have any middle income housing, and one thing I've always thought of was like, with all these new units, which can house a lot of people, what if we slowly like stopped allowing these rentals to be renewed, and eventually we convert all these back into single family homes? Because that would help diversify and that would help bring those neighborhoods. Because you talk to people that live there that are lifelong residents, they're like, oh, I hate all these college students living by me. And I'm like, well, why'd you buy a house 2 blocks from campus? Like, that was your own fault. But I understand it, because when they bought it, they were probably like 30 and now they're 50, and they're like, I'm not in the same spot in my life. But it'd be nice to maybe bring the community back, and then, you know, these apartment complexes are wonderful. I can't imagine that the kids don't want to live there, but I'd like to see like what type of property taxes are they paying? Or like, those are gonna fall off in 20 years and now all of a sudden they're gonna be paying like 200 grand, like, I don't know. Cause like, that's something that we could look into the forecast then and say, you know,
One of those future things.
yeah, right. And I don't know, maybe they're 10 years, but I thought I read 20, but they've been building units for a long time. So maybe something will expire, but once they're 20 years old, they'll probably tear them down and build them back up.
Well, there's really 2 ways to raise property tax revenue, right? You either raise the millage or you increase the taxable value,
Right.
and you increase taxable value by having more housing.
Right.
Yeah, I want to change I want to change the agenda for the next meeting.
Yeah.
We want to see your presentation and we want one on tax incentives.
Okay, that's what I was
That's
hearing.
what that's the whole next meeting. Then the health insurance, you can schedule him for the next meeting,
Okay,
and then we can do the debt service at that meeting. Okay,
Okay,
but you're right, he's right. Tax incentives, we should have started looking at before now.
okay, but I want to make clear, you know, something on that. We also, you need a presentation on our policy.
Yeah.
So we have adopted a policy in the city of East Lansing. We only use tax increment financing, and putting aside the fact that, you know, the DDA is funded by a TIF, you know, DMB is funded by a TIF. Those are limited to the downtown area and are assessed against businesses. Those are 2 TIFs, 2 different TIFs, 2 different operations. And so our policy is that we only permit tax increment financing to pay for public infrastructure improvements and environmental cleanup. And we've stuck with that. I mean, we're not required by state law to limit it to that since the time we adopted that policy. So that's why a presentation, I think, would be pretty good. There are other options under tax increment financing, which include using it to fund expansions of housing, not apartment buildings necessarily, but expansions of housing, particularly for low to moderate income individuals. And we've had that policy in the downtown for a long time. So all of these should be part of a presentation to you. And just because nobody seems to really understand tax increment financing, here's how it works. And we'll take the senior apartments as an example. They don't get any tax increment financing for the senior apartments. They were forced by us to build us a parking garage. The cost of that garage is paid back with their own taxes. So they do pay their taxes. They send them into the treasurer, and the treasurer returns that money to them as this year's payment on the debt that we owe them for that parking garage and its construction and cost. And it is 30 years, not 20. It can be shorter, although there's some bills in the legislature to require it to be longer now. And, but it can be up to 30 years. And the TIF that we use to extend Albert, for instance, on the other side of Abbott. So all that was rebuilt, new sewers, new everything in there. They had to pay for that. That was paid off, the developer. And we paid them back. And because the value of their property went up so dramatically after they constructed it, we paid it off in a very short period of time, because they never get more than what we actually owe them. And
Owed
that
them for
money-
What?
or are requiring them to rebuild the road. They had to
But without-
build a new road, so, and they had to put new sewers in, and they aren't required by law to do that in construction, but we require that, and then that's what we give them. We pay back the debt that we would pay any contractor to do it. And the maximum interest on that, and we could take a look at that also, is 5%. When commercially, people are charging 6.5 now. So it turned out to be a better deal for us than we anticipated at the time. So all of Albert was rebuilt on the south side as part of that project too. And so that's the money that's being repaid, not for building an apartment building or even the senior housing above it. So
Don't have a good sense of what Tifa's. I mean, that's your more recent policy. We don't have a sense either of what happened beforehand and what's still on the books.
I don't think there's any tips that are still in existence from
Well,
before those.
tax incentives of different kinds.
Yeah, I mean, we adopted that policy in 2015 or something like that, so we weren't gonna pay, and we've never provided TIF for a student apartment building, so that's, we get all the money increased, from Bogue Street. It
So-
just comes straight to us, so.
Mark, if something ever happens on the Evergreen properties, could happen. Will the DDA benefit from that or will the city benefit from that?
Both will benefit from it, and the DDA owns the property, that's the DDA area, so they capture through their TIF. I think the city portion of any increase, we still get whatever it was worth before. So I'm not sure,
But it doesn't reset to market value for the city portion.
yes, it does.
It will
actually.
set, reset, okay.
And that includes brownfields. I mean, I assume you have them.
Yes.
Yeah. And do you have any commercial incentives?
I have Ts. I'd have
Or
to,
any other deals that any commercials were given? Or were those state? Yeah, I guess those are the questions we can ask.
yeah,
of Whoever you're bringing.
I was gonna say I would defer to probably Andrea and Heather.
Okay, all right, thanks.
You know, and this is gonna be a stupid question again, sorry. I know nothing about business taxes that get paid to the city. I've never been a business owner, so I don't. I mean, is there anything to wiggle around in there?
Like, are you thinking, so businesses have to pay income tax? They have to pay personal property taxes for the equipment or physical things, and if they own the property, they have to pay property taxes, I guess. And then if there's business license fees, they might have to pay that. Outside of that, I think that's it.
But their property taxes are the same formula,
Same as ours.
Yeah.
except they pay a non-homestead amount to the schools. It's like
Oh,
if
yeah.
it's your home, you pay less taxes than if it's not your home. But other than that, it's the identical math that it is for a house. All right, so we have our next agenda. Anybody got anything else? All right,
Motion to adjourn.
thank you.
A second.
Thank you. I think this was a helpful meeting, I think.